never should have checked the visitor logs that morning, but once I saw the pattern, I couldn't look away. My name is Vincent Caro, and I've worked as head groundskeeper at Meadowbrook Cemetery in Salem, Oregon for the past 17 years. It's a 100-acre property with over 12,000 interments, most dating back to the early 1900s. My job is simple: maintain the grounds, repair damaged markers, keep the grass trimmed, and make sure families can mourn in peace. The work is quiet, methodical, and until 3 months ago, I would have called it predictable. It started in early September. I arrived at dawn like I always do, coffee in hand, ready to walk the perimeter before the morning crew arrived. The eastern section was my first stop, rows of modest headstones beneath a canopy of Douglas fir. That's when I noticed the salt, a perfect circle, maybe 4 feet in diameter, surrounding grave 14-J. The marker was simple granite. Margaret Ann Holloway, born 1953, died 1987. Beloved mother, the salt was coarse, like kosher or sea salt, and the ring was so precise it looked drawn with a compass. I crouched down and touched it. The granules were damp with dew, but undisturbed, as if they'd been placed hours earlier. I swept it away with a push broom, chalked it up to vandalism or some grief ritual I didn't understand, and went about my day. I trimmed hedges near the chapel, reset a tilted marker in Section G, and checked the irrigation system in the veterans area. By evening, I'd forgotten all about it. The next morning, the salt circle was back. Same grave, same perfect diameter, same coarse white granules forming an unbroken ring. I stood there, broom in hand, staring at it. The cemetery had been locked since 6 the previous evening. The gates were chained. No footprints marked the wet grass around the grave. No tire tracks on the access road. Just the circle, pristine and inexplicable. I swept it away again. This time, I made a note in my daily log. Possible trespassing, Section E, Grave 14-J monitor. I didn't mention the salt. It felt too strange to write down. By the end of the week, the pattern was undeniable. Every single morning, the salt circle reappeared. I started arriving earlier, 5:30, then 5, then 4:45. It didn't matter. The circle was always there, waiting. I reviewed the security footage from the cameras mounted at the main gate and chapel entrance. Nothing. No vehicles, no pedestrians. The timestamp showed hours of empty darkness, then the sudden glow of my headlights as I arrived at each morning. I watched the footage 3 times, frame by frame. The circle wasn't there at midnight. It wasn't there at 3, but by 4:30, when the first hint of light touched the horizon, it had appeared. I should have left it alone. I should have reported it to the cemetery director and let someone else handle it. But I'm the kind of person who needs to understand the ground I walk on. So I started researching Margaret Holloway. The records showed she died in a house fire in 1987. She was 34, survived by one daughter, Rebecca, who was 9 at the time. The obituary mentioned no other family. The plot had been purchased by Rebecca's grandmother, who was also interred at Meadowbrook, 3 rows south. I checked the visitor logs. Rebecca Holloway signed in every Sunday at 2 in the afternoon. Her signature was neat, consistent, always the same blue pen. I cross referenced the dates. She'd been coming for years, decades even, never missed a week. Then I noticed something that made my hands go cold. The most recent entry was from 4 months ago, July 9th. After that, nothing. No signature, no visit recorded, but I'd seen fresh flowers on Margaret's grave just last Sunday, white lilies, tied with a purple ribbon. I'd assumed it was Rebecca. Everyone assumes things like that. I decided to wait. That Sunday, I parked my truck near the maintenance shed with a clear view of Section E and Grave 14-J. At 1:55, a woman approached on foot, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, carrying a bouquet of white lilies tied with a purple ribbon. She walked straight to Margaret's grave, knelt, placed the flowers in the built-in vase, and stayed there for nearly 30 minutes. I watched her lips move, though I couldn't hear the words. When she left, I drove to the main office and checked the log. No signature, no entry. The last name on the page was from a family visiting Section C. I stopped her the following Sunday, pulled my truck alongside the access road as she walked in. She looked startled but not afraid. I kept my voice gentle, explained I was the groundskeeper, asked if she'd mind signing the visitor log. It helped us keep track of families, I said. For safety. She smiled. It was a kind smile, but there was something absent in her eyes. I always sign in, she said softly. Not recently, I replied, trying to sound casual. The last entry I have for you is from July. Her expression didn't change. I come every Sunday, she said. I never miss. I showed her the log, pointed to the blank weeks, the empty lines where her name should have been. She stared at the page for a long time, then looked up at me. Her face was calm, but her voice wavered. I don't understand. Neither did I. She visited her mother's grave. I followed at a distance, watched her kneel, watched her arrange the flowers. When she left, I checked the visitor log again, still blank. I stood there in the office, logbook open on the counter, trying to make sense of it. That night, I stayed late, parked my truck in the shadows near Section E, and waited. The sun set. The cemetery grew dark. I watched Grave 14-J through binoculars, the granite marker barely visible in the ambient light from the distant road. At 11:58, I saw movement. Not a person, not an animal, just a faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising from pavement. And then, slowly, the salt began to appear. Not poured, not scattered, it simply materialized, grain by grain, forming that perfect, unbroken circle. I sat there until dawn, too afraid to move, watching the circle complete itself in the darkness. I still sweep it away every morning, and every morning it returns. Rebecca still visits on Sundays, though the log never records her presence. I've stopped trying to understand it. Some things in this work aren't meant to be explained. They're just meant to remind you that the ground we walk on holds more than bones and memory. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Rebecca knows. If she can feel the circle when she kneels in the grass, her mother's name carved into stone just inches from her hands. I never ask, and she never says. If you ever see someone standing perfectly still at a graveside for 4 hours, don't assume they're grieving normally. My name is Isla Brennan, and I've served as cemetery director at Harrow Ridge Memorial Park in Bend, Oregon, for the past 12 years. I oversee operations for a 70-acre property that handles roughly 200 interments annually, coordinate with funeral homes across 3 counties, and ensure every service runs with dignity and precision. I've witnessed thousands of burials. I thought I'd seen every variation of grief, every ritual, every way a person says goodbye. I was wrong. The Caldwell service was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday in October. Dennis Caldwell, 71, retired postal worker, survived by a sister in Arizona and a handful of distant cousins. It was a modest service, maybe 15 people expected, graveside only, plot 7-C in the newer section near the western tree line. I reviewed the details that morning while checking the cemetery's schedule. Everything appeared routine. I arrived at the site 30 minutes early to ensure the grounds crew had finished their prep work. The grave was properly excavated, green carpet positioned around the perimeter, chairs arranged in 2 neat rows. The October air was crisp, the afternoon light slanting through the pines. Perfect conditions for a dignified service. The funeral procession arrived at 1:50. I stood near the chapel access road, clipboard in hand, doing a quick head count for our records. The hearse led, followed by 3 vehicles. People emerged slowly, elderly relatives, a few middle-aged faces I didn't recognize. I counted them as they gathered near the chairs, 11, 12, 13. And then I saw the others. 7 women, standing apart from the main group, forming a loose semicircle at the edge of the canopy. They wore identical black dresses, not mourning clothes exactly, but simple old-fashioned garments that looked hand-sewn. Each woman held a white candle, already lit despite the daylight. The flames barely flickered in the still air. What struck me most was their stillness. Mourners shift weight, dab eyes, exchange glances. These women stood like statues, faces forward, eyes fixed on the casket as it was removed from the hearse. I couldn't see their features clearly from my position, but something about their posture felt synchronized, almost rehearsed. I made a note on my clipboard. 7 additional attendees, unregistered. Sometimes families forget to mention extended relatives or close friends. It happens. I moved closer to offer my standard greeting, to let them know where the restrooms were located, where they could find water after the service. As I approached, I noticed their faces. Not similar, identical, same narrow nose, same high cheekbones, same dark hair pulled back in the exact same style. Sisters, I thought, maybe cousins with a strong family resemblance. But as I looked from one to the next, a cold discomfort settled in my chest. They weren't just similar, they were perfect copies of each other, down to the way they held their candles, the angle of their chins. I opened my mouth to speak, but the pastor began the service. I stepped back, not wanting to interrupt. The women didn't sit. They remained standing throughout the prayers, the reading, the lowering of the casket. Their candles burned without wavering. I watched them from the corner of my eye, trying to understand what I was seeing. The family didn't acknowledge them. No one glanced their way, offered a chair, whispered a greeting. It was as if they were invisible to everyone but me. The service ended at 2:45. Mourners began to disperse, returning to their vehicles, speaking in low voices. I stayed back, waiting for the 7 women to move. They didn't. They stood there, candles still burning, eyes still fixed on the covered grave as the grounds crew began their work. I checked my watch. 3 o'clock, 3:15, 3:30. By 4, everyone else had left. The crew had finished, packed their equipment, driven away. The grave was filled, the flowers arranged. Only the 7 women remained, standing in their semicircle, holding their candles. I walked over to them. "Excuse me," I said gently. "The service has concluded. Is there anything I can help you with?" They didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't shift their gaze. I moved directly in front of the nearest woman, close enough to see the details of her face: pale skin, gray eyes, a small mole near her left temple. "Miss," I tried again. Nothing. Her chest didn't rise or fall. The candle in her hand burned steadily, the wax somehow not melting, not dripping. I felt a spike of fear then, sharp and instinctive. I stepped back and returned to my office in the administration building. I sat at my desk, staring at the monitor that displayed the cemetery's security camera feeds. I pulled up the feed for Section 7, the camera mounted on a pole near the western tree line. The grave was visible, the fresh earth dark against the grass. And standing at the edge of the frame, perfectly still, was a single woman in a black dress holding a white candle. One woman, not 7. I rewound the footage, watched the entire service again. The hearse arrived. Mourners gathered. The casket was lowered. People drifted away. But in the recording, only one woman stood apart from the group, her candle lit, her posture rigid. I could see myself approaching her in the footage, my mouth moving as I spoke. The woman didn't react, didn't move. I checked the timestamp, 4:30 in the afternoon. I switched to the live feed. The woman was still there, standing in the exact same position. I looked out my office window towards Section 7. From this distance, I could just make out the figures. 7 of them, arranged in their semicircle. I watched the monitor until 6. The woman on the screen never moved, not once, no shift in posture, no adjustment of her grip on the candle, no turn of her head. At 6:15, the sun began to set. The cemetery lights activated automatically. The woman remained. At 7, I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and drove my cart back to plot 7-C. The grave was empty. No women, no candles, just the flowers, already wilting in the evening chill, and the fresh earth settling into place. I checked the security footage the next morning. The woman had vanished from the frame at exactly 7:03, the moment I stepped out of my office. One moment she was there, perfectly still, candle burning. The next frame, She was gone, no walking away, no gradual fade, just absence. I pulled the contact information for the Caldwell family and called the sister in Arizona. I kept my tone professional, asked if she knew anything about the 7 women at the service. She paused. "What 7 women?" she asked. There were only 13 of us, family and a few of Dennis's friends. I described them, the black dresses, the candles, the way they stood apart. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was tight. "My grandmother used to tell a story," she said slowly, "about my great aunt Margaret. She died young, in the 1920s. The family said 7 women came to her funeral, women nobody recognized. They stood around the grave for hours after everyone left. My grandmother saw them when she came back to leave flowers. She said they looked exactly the same, like reflections in a mirror." I thanked her and hung up. I've watched that footage 100 times since then. One woman standing still for 4 hours and 18 minutes holding a candle that never burned down. I've checked the cemetery records for plot 7-C. Before Dennis Caldwell, the plot was empty. Before that, nothing. The land was undeveloped until 2006. But sometimes, late in the evening, I see her out there, just one, standing at the edge of Section 7, holding a candle I can't quite see. And I wonder if she's waiting, or if she's already been there all along, reflected 7 times in a world I can't fully see. I don't go near that plot anymore after dark, and I've stopped trying to count the mourners at our services. Some numbers aren't meant to add up. I thought I understood the finality of death until I watched something tighten its grip on a body 3 days after the heart stopped beating. My name is Reed Mercer, and I've worked as a licensed embalmer at Whitmore and Sons Funeral Home in Tacoma, Washington, for the past 19 years. I've prepared over 2,000 bodies in that time, each one with the same careful attention to procedure, the same respect for the person who once inhabited that flesh. The work is methodical, intimate, and governed by strict protocols. There are no surprises in embalming. Everything follows a predictable sequence, or at least, that's what I believed before Eleanor Voss arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November. The intake was routine. Eleanor was 76, passed away peacefully at home under hospice care after a long battle with emphysema. Her daughter, Carolyn, handled the arrangements with quiet efficiency, viewing on Thursday, service on Friday, cremation to follow. The body arrived at 10 in the morning, standard transport protocol, no complications noted on the paperwork. I wheeled Eleanor into the preparation room and began my initial examination. Standard procedure: check for pacemakers, document any surgical scars or identifying marks, verify identity against the intake forms. Everything matched. Eleanor was dressed in the clothing she'd died in, a simple cotton nightgown, pale blue, soft from years of washing. I noted her wedding ring, a small gold band, and a cross on a thin chain around her neck. Nothing unusual. I began the undressing process, working carefully, preserving dignity even in this clinical space. That's when I should have seen the thread. but there was nothing on her wrists. I'm certain of it. I removed the nightgown, documented the absence of any medical devices, and prepared the embalming solution. The room was quiet except for the hum of the ventilation system and the soft clink of instruments on stainless steel. I returned to the body after mixing the fluids, ready to begin arterial injection. That's when I saw it. Red thread wrapped around both wrists in a precise figure-8 pattern. Not tied, wrapped, as if wound by careful hands. The thread was thin, like embroidery floss, and the color was deep crimson, almost the shade of dried blood. I stopped, instrument still in hand, and stared at it. I replayed the last 20 minutes in my mind. I'd undressed her, examined her. I would have seen thread on her wrists. I would have documented it. But my notes showed nothing, and my memory was clear. There had been no thread. I set down my instruments and leaned closer. The thread wasn't knotted. The ends seemed to disappear into the wrapping itself, as if it formed a continuous loop. I touched it gently with gloved fingers. It was taut, pressing slightly into the pale skin, and it felt rough, handmade. I tried to find an end to unwrap it, but there was none. Just continuous loops, tight and deliberate. I checked the intake paperwork again. No mention of bindings, no religious or cultural requests, no family instructions about leaving anything on the body. I called Caroline. Did your mother have any thread or fabric wrapped around her wrists when she passed? I kept my voice neutral, professional. Caroline sounded confused. No, nothing like that. Why? I explained what I'd found. She was silent for a moment, then said, "That doesn't make sense. The hospice nurse and I dressed her together. There was nothing on her wrists. Are you sure?" I was looking at it. I was sure. Caroline arrived 30 minutes later. I brought her into the preparation room, kept the body modestly covered except for the wrists. She stared at the red thread, her face pale. "I don't understand," she whispered. "That wasn't there this morning." I held her hands. I would have felt it. "Has anyone else been alone with her?" I asked gently. "No. The transport team brought her directly to you. No one else." I told her I'd remove it, that it was probably something that had gotten caught during transport, though I didn't believe that. She nodded and left, visibly shaken. I tried to cut the thread with scissors. The blades wouldn't grip it. I tried a scalpel. The edge slid off as if the thread were coated in something slick. I tried unwinding it, but my fingers couldn't find purchase. The loops were too tight, the thread too thin and smooth. After 20 minutes, I gave up and documented the anomaly in my notes, took photographs for the file, and proceeded with the embalming. I worked slowly, methodically, trying to ignore the thread. But every time I glanced at Eleanor's wrists, it seemed tighter, not visibly moving, but somehow more embedded, the skin around it beginning to show faint indentations. I told myself it was my imagination, the pressure of the embalming process causing the skin to settle differently. I finished the procedure, dressed Eleanor in the clothing Caroline had provided, and positioned her hands over her abdomen. The thread was hidden beneath the long sleeves of her burial dress. I checked on her before leaving that evening. The thread was tighter. I was sure of it now. The indentations were deeper, the thread pressing into flesh that should have been firm from the embalming. I took more photographs, compared them to the ones from earlier. The difference was undeniable. The next morning, I arrived early and went straight to the preparation room. Eleanor was resting in the viewing parlor now, casket open, ready for the family. I walked over and gently pulled back the sleeves of her dress. The thread had cut into her skin, not deeply, but enough to leave visible grooves, dark lines circling both wrists. The thread itself seemed thinner, as if it had burrowed deeper into the tissue. I felt a wave of nausea, sharp and sudden. This wasn't possible. The embalming fluid should have fixed the tissue, preserved it. Nothing should be moving, changing, tightening. I called Caroline. Again, she came immediately, saw the marks, and broke down. "What is this?" she asked through tears. "What's happening to her?" I didn't have an answer. I suggested we cover the wrists with long gloves, told her it might be some kind of delayed tissue reaction, something I'd never seen before but could be explained. She didn't believe me. I didn't believe myself. The viewing went forward. Family and friends filed through, offered condolences, paid their respects. I stood in the back, watching Eleanor's hands folded peacefully over her chest, the gloves hiding what lay beneath. No one noticed. No one asked. After the service, I was alone with the body for the final time before transport to the crematory. I removed the gloves. The thread was gone. Not cut, not unwound, simply absent. But the grooves remained, deep and precise, circling her wrists like marks from restraints. I documented it, photographed it, and closed the casket. I've never told anyone the full truth of what I saw. The crematory processed Eleanor without incident. Caroline scattered the ashes at a place her mother loved. The file is closed. But sometimes, late at night in the preparation room, I find myself checking the wrists of the deceased before I begin my work. And twice now, I've seen thread that wasn't there before, fine, red, wrapped in that same figure-8 pattern. Both times, I called the family immediately, asked if they'd placed it there. Both times, they said no. I remove it now, quickly, before it has time to settle, before it can tighten. I burn it in the medical waste incinerator, and I don't document it. I don't photograph it. I just make sure it's gone before anyone else sees. Because some things bind tighter than memory, tighter than grief, and I'm not equipped to understand what they want or why they're there. I only know they're patient, and they're deliberate, and they wait in the quiet spaces where the living stop watching. I check every wrist now, every single one. Every cemetery keeps secrets, but most of them stay buried with the dead. This one carved itself into wood on a schedule I couldn't break. My name is Dara Finch, and I've worked as night security supervisor at Crescent Hills Memorial Gardens in Eugene, Oregon for the past 14 years. It's a historic property established in 1898 with over 30,000 interments across 200 rolling acres. My shift runs from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, 5 days a week. I walk the grounds, check the gates, monitor the chapel and mausoleums, and make sure the dead rest undisturbed. It's solitary work, the kind that suits people who prefer silence and their own company. I've always been comfortable with both. The chapel sits at the heart of the oldest section, a small stone building with stained glass windows and a heavy oak door that dates back to the cemetery's founding. It's used for intimate services, maybe once or twice a month, and the rest of the time it stays locked. I have the only key on my ring aside from the cemetery director's master set. I first noticed the carvings on the 13th of March. I was making my midnight rounds, flashlight in hand, checking the chapel exterior as I always do. The beam caught something on the door, fresh scratches in the wood, pale against the dark aged oak. I stepped closer and saw symbols, crude but deliberate, carved in a vertical line down the left side of the door. 5 of them, each about the size of my palm, gouged deep enough to reveal the lighter wood beneath the weathered surface. They weren't letters. They weren't any alphabet I recognized. Just angular shapes, harsh lines intersecting in ways that felt wrong to look at, like optical illusions that made my eyes ache. I ran my fingers over them. The wood was rough, splintered, the work of something sharp and patient. I photographed them with my phone and filed a vandalism report with the cemetery director the next morning. She was upset but not surprised. Vandalism happens, especially in older cemeteries. She scheduled a contractor to sand and refinish the door. Within a week, the symbols were gone, the wood smooth and restained. On the 13th of April, they came back. Same location, same 5 symbols, carved in the exact same order, in the exact same vertical line. I checked the security footage from the cameras mounted near the entrance gate and along the main road. Nothing, no vehicles, no pedestrians, just empty frames of darkness. Then my flashlight beam sweeping across the door at midnight, illuminating the fresh carvings. The director was less patient this time. She suspected teenagers, told me to increase patrols, to check the chapel every hour instead of every 2. I did. I walked past that door at 10, at 11, at midnight. At 10 and 11, the wood was smooth. At midnight, the symbols were there, freshly carved, splinters still clinging to the edges. I started arriving early on the 13th, positioning myself within sight of the chapel from 9 o'clock onward. I watched through binoculars from the maintenance shed, a clear view across 100 yards of headstones and manicured grass. At 11:45, the door was clean. At midnight, I walked over with my flashlight. The symbols had appeared, no sound, no movement, no visible cause, just wood that had been whole, now marked. I didn't file a report that time. I photographed the symbols again and began researching. I spent hours online searching for matches in occult databases, historical texts, anything that might explain what I was looking at. I found nothing exact, but the style reminded me of protection wards or binding sigils, symbols meant to trap or repel. The thought made me uneasy. On the 13th of May, I was ready. I set up a motion-activated trail camera on a tree 20 feet from the chapel, angled directly at the door, I checked it at 11. The door was smooth. I checked it at midnight. The symbols were there. I retrieved the camera and reviewed the footage. 11:58, door intact. 11:59, door intact. Midnight, static, just 3 seconds of white noise and distortion. 12:01, symbols present. I felt cold then, the kind of cold that starts in your chest and spreads. I watched that footage a dozen times. 3 seconds of interference, perfectly timed, and then the symbols simply existed where they hadn't before. I started digging through the cemetery's archives, looking for anything that might connect to the chapel or the 13th of the month. The records were extensive: plot maps, burial logs, service records dating back over a century. I spent weeks searching, and then, in a filing cabinet in the basement of the administration building, I found a folder labeled Confiscated Items 1952. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy, showing the pages of a handwritten diary. The notes indicated it had been taken from the belongings of a woman named Iris Cormack, who died in 1952 at the age of 38. Cause of death, suicide. The diary had been confiscated by the county sheriff, deemed evidence in what the notes cryptically described as disturbing circumstances. It was later returned to the cemetery when no next of kin claimed her effects. I studied the photographs. The diary pages showed sketches, dozens of them, scattered among rambling entries about grief and loss. The sketches were symbols, angular, harsh, deliberate. I held my phone next to the photographs and compared them to my pictures of the chapel door. They matched, not similar, identical. All 5 symbols, in the same vertical arrangement, appeared on page after page of Iris Cormack's diary. I looked up her plot. Section A, row 3, space 12. The oldest part of the cemetery, directly across from the chapel, maybe 60 yards away, her grave marked by a simple, flat stone nearly swallowed by moss and overgrowth. The diary entries were difficult to read in the photographs, the handwriting erratic, but certain phrases stood out. They won't let me rest. The door must stay marked. If I stop, they'll come through. Through what? I didn't know. The notes didn't explain. The sheriff's report was missing, lost to time or misfiling. On the 13th of June, I stood at Iris Cormack's grave at 11:30, flashlight off, waiting in the darkness. At 11:58, I heard it. Not footsteps, not wind. A sound like whispering, faint and layered, too many voices speaking at once. It came from the direction of the chapel. At midnight, the whispering stopped. I turned on my flashlight and walked to the chapel door. The symbols were there, freshly carved, wood splinters falling to the stone step like snow. I don't file reports anymore. The director stopped asking after the 3rd time, chalked it up to something environmental, wood rot, or expansion. I let her believe that. I sand the door down myself now, every 14th of the month, smooth it until there's no trace of the symbols. And on the 13th, I stay away from the chapel. I patrol the perimeter, check the gates, avoid Section A entirely, because the whispering has grown louder. It doesn't stop at midnight anymore. It lingers just below the threshold of hearing, and sometimes I catch fragments, words I don't understand, cadences that feel older than language. Iris Cormac's grave remains untended. The moss has thickened. The stone is barely visible now. And every month on the 13th, something carves her symbols into the chapel door, precise and patient, as if following instructions left behind by a woman who's been dead for over 70 years. I don't know what she was trying to keep out, or maybe keep in. I only know the door stays marked, and whatever covenant she made hasn't been broken yet. And I've started to wonder if I stopped sanding the symbols away, if I let them accumulate month after month, would the door hold? Or would something finally answer the call she's been making all this time, waiting on the other side? I don't want to find out, so I keep sanding and I keep walking, and I never, ever check the chapel at midnight on the 13th. Some routines are meant to be broken. This isn't one of them. The dead don't move their own markers, but something in Lakewood Cemetery rearranges them with a purpose I'm still trying to understand. My name is Thea Ashford, and I've worked as a mortician and cemetery coordinator at Lakewood Memorial in Olympia, Washington for the past 22 years. I handle everything from embalming and service coordination to plot maintenance and record keeping. It's comprehensive work that requires attention to detail, respect for protocol, and an understanding that every headstone represents a life, a family, a story that deserves to be told correctly. That belief has guided my career until I met the stone that told two stories, depending on which way it faced. It was early October, the kind of gray morning the Pacific Northwest does best. Low clouds, mist hanging in the trees, the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. I was doing my weekly walkthrough of Section D, the area reserved for burials from the 1980s and 90s, checking for damaged markers, sunken plots, anything that needed repair. Most of the headstones were simple, granite or marble, modest engravings, nothing ornate. But one caught my attention immediately. The stone was facing east, away from the access road, away from the direction every other marker in that row faced. It was a clear error, probably the result of ground settling or vandalism. The marker was medium-sized, dark gray granite with a rounded top, the kind we installed commonly in the 90s. I couldn't read the inscription from where I stood. The back was blank, smooth stone facing the path. I made a note on my tablet and called our maintenance supervisor, let him know we'd need to reposition a marker in Section D, Row 8, Plot 14. He said he'd send someone out that afternoon. I went back to my rounds, but it bothered me. Something about the way it sat there, deliberately facing the wrong direction, like it had turned its back on the living. I walked over to check the inscription to verify the name against our records before the crew came to move it. The back of the stone wasn't blank. There was an engraving, the letters deep and precise, but they were backward, mirror verting, carved in reverse, so the letters faced inward toward the granite. I traced them with my finger, reading right to left. Wydenek H. Bazil, Elizabeth Kennedy, I knew that name. I checked our database on my phone. Elizabeth Kennedy, born 1949, died 1994. She'd been a school teacher, survived by a husband and two adult children. Her plot was 14-D, exactly where I stood. But the stone should have faced west, toward the road, like every other marker in the row. And her name should have been carved on the front, not backward on the back. I called the monument company we contracted with, asked if they'd ever seen an error like this. The woman I spoke to was confused. "We don't carve names backward," she said. "That's not something that would pass inspection, and we always orient stones according to the cemetery's specifications." I sent her a photograph. She called back 10 minutes later. "I don't know what to tell you," she said. "That's not our work. Or if it is, someone altered it after installation. You should check your records." I pulled the original installation paperwork. The stone had been placed in December of 1994, 2 months after Elizabeth's burial. The documentation included a photograph of the installed marker, front facing west, name and dates clearly legible, standard orientation. There was no mention of backward engraving, no secondary carving on the reverse side. The maintenance crew arrived at 2. I met them at the plot and explained the situation. They brought a small excavator, the kind we use for resetting sunken stones. It took 20 minutes to dig out the base, lift the marker with straps, and rotate it to face west. When they set it down, I saw the front. It was blank, completely smooth, no name, no dates, no inscription of any kind, just polished granite. I stood there, staring at it, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. The crew supervisor walked around it, ran his hand over the surface. "That's weird," he said. "You said the name was on the back?" "It was backward," I said. "Mirror writing. So now it's on the back, right side out." We walked around to check. The back was blank now, too. Both sides, smooth and unmarked, as if the stone had never been engraved at all. I sent the crew away, told them I needed to verify the stone's identity before we did anything else. They left the excavator on site, the ground disturbed but the marker upright, facing west like it should. I took photographs from every angle, checked the plot number against our map. Everything matched. This was Elizabeth Kennedy's stone, but the engravings had vanished. I called her son. He lived 2 hours away, came out the next morning, and we stood together at the plot, and I explained what had happened. He looked at the blank stone, his face tight with confusion and anger. "This isn't right," he said. "My mother's name should be here. We paid for that inscription." I showed him the photographs I'd taken the day before, the backward name, clear and deep in the granite. He stared at the images on my phone, then back at the stone. "I don't understand. Where did it go?" Neither did I. He filed a complaint with the monument company. They sent someone out to inspect the stone. The technician found no evidence of engraving, no grooves, no trace of letters. "It's like it was never carved," he said, "but granite doesn't heal itself. If there were letters here, they'd leave marks, even if someone tried to grind them out." We ordered a replacement marker, standard protocol, the family's expense waived due to the unexplained defect. It took 3 weeks to produce and install. I supervised the installation personally. The new stone was perfect. Elizabeth Kennedy, her dates, a simple epitaph chosen by her children. Front facing west, clearly visible from the road. The next morning, I drove past Section D on my way into the office. From the road, I could see row 8. The new stone was facing east again, its back to the path. I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. I parked and walked over. The stone had been rotated exactly 180 degrees. The front, with its fresh inscription, now faced away. I walked around to the back. It was blank, but when I looked at it from an angle, in the early morning light, I could see faint marks, not carved, scratched, as if with something sharp and thin. Letters, barely visible, etched into the surface. Edenic Basil. I photographed it. By afternoon, the scratches had faded, or maybe my eyes had adjusted because I couldn't see them anymore. But I knew they'd been there. I stopped trying to correct it after that. The stone stays facing east. The family doesn't visit often, and when they do, I make sure to be there, to walk them to the plot from the opposite direction so they see the front first. I've never told them about the backward name or the way the stone turns itself around when no one's watching. I've checked the other markers in Section D, 47 graves, all oriented correctly, all facing west. Except one, Plot 14, Row 8. Elizabeth Kennedy, who taught third grade for 26 years, who died of ovarian cancer at 45, whose stone insists on facing the wrong direction. I've read about reversal in folklore, about mirror writing, or writing used to trap spirits or confuse the dead. I don't know if that's what this is. I don't know if Elizabeth is trying to tell us something, or if something else is using her marker for purposes I can't begin to understand. What I know is this: every Monday morning, I check that stone, and every Monday morning, if it's been turned to face west, I leave it alone now. By Tuesday, it will have moved again, back to its preferred position, back to facing away from the living, toward the deep woods that border the cemetery's eastern edge. And sometimes, early in the morning when the mist is thick, I see someone standing near that plot. A woman, her back to me, facing the same direction as the stone. She never moves when I approach. She simply fades when I get too close, like she was never there at all. I don't correct the stone anymore. I've learned that some positions are deliberate, some orientations are chosen, and not everything that faces away from us is lost. Some things are just looking in a different direction, towards something we're not meant to see. Elizabeth Kennedy's stone stays where it wants to be, and I've stopped asking why. I've buried thousands of people in my career, but I only dug one thing up that was never meant to see daylight again. My name is Holt Patterson, and I've served as funeral director at Riverside Memorial Park in Portland, Oregon, for the past 16 years. I oversee all aspects of cemetery operations, burial services, plot maintenance, landscaping projects, and family relations. The work requires a balance of compassion and practicality, an understanding that while grief is emotional, the ground itself follows physical rules. Or at least, that's what I thought before we started the drainage project in Section 12. The problem began with heavy rains in February. The southwestern corner of the cemetery, Section 12, had always struggled with water retention. After 3 weeks of constant downpour, several graves showed signs of settling, the earth sinking in irregular patterns that required immediate attention. I contracted a landscaping company to install French drains, improve grading, and reinforce the affected plots. The work was scheduled to take 2 weeks. They started on a Monday morning. I walked the site with the crew chief, a man named Garrett who'd worked cemetery projects for over 20 years. We marked the plots that needed attention, verified plot numbers against our maps, and ensured all the families had been notified of the temporary disturbance. Plot 37-C was among them, a recent burial from 6 weeks prior, a woman named Marion Hartwell, 63, who died of complications from diabetes. The crew began excavation on Tuesday. They dug carefully around the perimeter of Plot 37, installing drainage pipe about 3 feet down, well above the burial vault. Standard procedure, nothing invasive. I was in my office when Garrett called me on the radio. "You need to come see something," he said. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it I didn't like. I drove out to Section 12. Garrett was standing in a shallow trench beside Marion's grave, holding a small object wrapped in a work cloth. The crew had stopped digging. 3 men stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. "We found this," Garrett said, unwrapping the cloth, "about 2 feet down, directly beneath the grave. It was face up. It was a mirror, antique, maybe 4 inches in diameter, round with a tarnished silver frame, decorated in floral patterns. The glass was intact, clouded with age and soil, but still reflective. I could see fragments of sky in its surface, distorted and dark. "Face up?" I asked. "Yeah, positioned deliberately, I think, like someone buried it there on purpose." I took the mirror from him, wiped the glass with my thumb. The silver was cold, far colder than it should have been given the mild weather. "How deep was the grave when Marion was buried?" Garrett checked his notes. Standard depth, 6 feet to the top of the vault. This mirror was about 8 feet down in undisturbed soil, which meant it had been there before Marion was buried, possibly decades before. I checked our records on my phone. The plot had been purchased in 2019, vacant until Marion's burial in January. Before that, Section 12 was undeveloped land, part of the cemetery's expansion in the late 2000s. "Probably from when this area was farmland," I said, trying to sound reasonable. "Old family burial, something left behind." Garrett didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "What do you want us to do with it?" "Bag it, tag it. I'll check with the Historical Society, see if they want it. Continue the drainage work." I took the mirror back to my office and placed it in a filing cabinet drawer, still wrapped in the work cloth. I meant to follow up, to make the calls I'd mentioned, but the next 3 days were consumed with other tasks. 2 services, a difficult family meeting, paperwork that had been piling up for weeks. The mirror stayed in the drawer, and I forgot about it. On Friday evening, I received a phone call from Marion Hartwell's daughter, Jessica. She sounded exhausted, strained. I need to ask you something, she said. Has anyone been disturbing my mother's grave? I assured her the landscaping work was complete, the site restored. Why do you ask? I've been having dreams, she said slowly, about my mother every night since Tuesday. She's standing at the foot of my bed, just staring at me. She doesn't speak. She just looks at me with this expression I can't describe. It's not her. It doesn't feel like her. I offered condolences, explained that vivid dreams were common in early grief. She thanked me and hung up. I thought nothing more of it until Saturday afternoon when Marion's sister called with an almost identical story. Dreams every night since Tuesday. Marion standing silently, staring, wrong somehow in ways she couldn't articulate. Sunday morning, Marion's husband called. Same dreams, same timing, same description of his late wife standing motionless at the foot of the bed, expression hollow and watching. 3 family members, 3 separate households, all experiencing the same nightmare starting the same night. Tuesday, the night we'd removed the mirror. I opened the filing cabinet drawer. The mirror was still there, wrapped in the work cloth. I unwrapped it and looked at the glass. It was cleaner than I remembered, as if something had polished it. I could see my reflection clearly now. My face, the office behind me, the fluorescent lights overhead. And for just a moment, I saw something else in the background. A figure standing in the corner where no one stood. I turned around. The office was empty. I wrapped the mirror again, quickly, my hands shaking. I researched mirror burials that evening, found references in folklore across a dozen cultures. Mirrors buried face up were meant to trap souls, to reflect them back into the earth, to prevent the dead from wandering. The practice was old, widespread, and treated with deep seriousness by those who believed. Monday morning, I called Garrett. I need you to put something back, I said. He met me at section 12 with a shovel. We dug a narrow hole beside Marion's grave, down through the drainage gravel, through the clay, until we reached undisturbed soil about 8 feet down. I placed the mirror at the bottom, face up, exactly as it had been found. We filled the hole carefully, tamped the earth, replaced the sod. I called Jessica that evening. How did you sleep last night? I asked. She paused. Fine, actually. First night without the dreams. I thought maybe I was finally processing things. Marion's sister called me on Tuesday. The nightmares had stopped. Marion's husband sent an email on Wednesday, thanking me for my support during a difficult time, mentioning that he'd finally been able to rest. I never told them about the mirror. I never explained what we'd done. I filed the incident report as a routine landscaping project, drainage installed successfully, no complications. But I think about it often, about what that mirror was holding in place and what briefly escaped when we removed it, about Marion Hartwell, who by all accounts was a kind woman, a loving mother and wife, now resting above a mirror she never knew existed. I've checked the records for Section 12, traced the land's history back as far as I can. There were homesteads here in the 1800s, small family farms that failed during the Depression. No formal burials recorded, but absence of record doesn't mean absence of graves. I've instituted a new policy for excavation projects. If crews find objects buried in unusual positions, they're to stop work immediately and notify me. Don't remove anything. Don't disturb anything. Just mark the location and step away. Because some things are buried face up for a reason, some reflections are meant to stay trapped beneath the earth, held in place by tarnished silver and old beliefs. And some mirrors don't show you what stands behind you, they show you what's trying to follow you home. The mirror stays buried now. Section 12 drains properly. Marion's family has moved forward with their grief, and I check that plot every week, looking for signs of settling, of disturbance, of anything that might indicate the ground is shifting again. So far, it remains still, and I intend to keep it that way. Some offerings aren't meant to be refused, and I learned that lesson by emptying a bowl I should have left alone. My name is Marin Cole, and I've worked as head groundskeeper at Blackwood Cemetery in Salem, Massachusetts for the past 11 years. It's one of the oldest burial grounds in New England, established in 1796 with sections that predate the American Revolution. The property spans 40 acres of rolling hills, ancient oak trees, and weathered stones that have watched over the dead for more than 2 centuries. My job is to maintain that history with respect, clearing brush, repairing paths, preserving markers, and ensuring the grounds remain dignified. I take that responsibility seriously. I always have. The oak tree stands at the center of Section A, the oldest part of the cemetery. It's massive, easily 300 years old, with a trunk 10 feet in diameter and branches that spread like cathedral arches over a dozen graves. Local historians believe it was already mature when the first burials took place. It's a landmark, a meeting point, and a place where families often gather during services. I check on it weekly, clear fallen branches, monitor its health for signs of disease or decay. I found the bowl on a Thursday morning in late April. It sat at the base of the oak, nestled between two roots that twisted up from the earth like gnarled hands. The bowl was wooden, hand-carved, dark with age, maybe 6 inches in diameter. It was filled with milk, fresh milk that still smelled sweet, and scattered across the surface were 7 coins. Old coins, not modern currency. I picked one up, 1823, a Liberty Head large cent, worn smooth but still legible. I looked around. The cemetery was empty, gates locked since the previous evening, no footprints in the damp grass, no signs of recent visitors, just the bowl, sitting there as if it had always been part of the landscape. I assumed it was some kind of historical reenactment, a prop left behind by a tour group or local historians. We occasionally hosted walking tours focused on the cemetery's Revolutionary War burials. I poured out the milk at the edge of the tree line, pocketed the coins to turn into the office, and placed the bowl in my work shed. I made a note to ask the cemetery director about it. The next morning, the bowl was back. Same location, nestled between the same 2 roots, filled with fresh milk. 7 new coins floating on the surface, all dated 1823. I stood there, holding my rake, trying to make sense of it. I'd locked the shed. The bowl had been inside. I checked. It was still there, sitting on the shelf where I'd left it. But here was another bowl, identical in every detail, filled and waiting. I emptied it again, took the coins, photographed the bowl and its location. This time I brought it to the office, showed it to Director Graham. He examined it, turned it over in his hands. Handmade, he said, probably 19th century, based on the tool marks. Could be valuable. Someone's been leaving it under the oak tree, I told him, twice now, filled with milk and old coins. He frowned. Odd. Could be some kind of ritual. Neo-pagan groups sometimes leave offerings in old cemeteries. I'll send out a notice asking people to refrain from leaving objects on cemetery property. I took the bowl back to my shed, locked it inside a cabinet this time. Checked the oak tree before I left that evening. Nothing. The next morning, 3 bowls waited at the base of the tree, all identical, all filled with milk and coins dated 1823. I felt cold then, standing there in the early light, looking at something that made no logical sense. I'd locked 2 bowls in my shed. No one could have carved 3 more overnight. But here they were, arranged in a neat triangle between the roots. I checked the nearest graves. Most were from the late 1700s, early 1800s, worn stones, many illegible after 2 centuries of weather. But one stood out, directly beneath the oak's largest branch. The stone was slate, cracked but readable. Constance Miller, born 1791, died 1823. Here lies one falsely accused. I knew that name. Every groundskeeper at Blackwood learns the cemetery's notable burials, and Constance Miller was among them. She'd been accused of witchcraft in 1823, one of the last such accusations in Massachusetts, decades after the Salem trials. She was tried, acquitted due to lack of evidence, but died 3 months later under circumstances the historical records described as suspicious and unresolved. She was 32. I researched her that evening, found references in local archives. The accusations against Constance involved spoiled milk, failed crops, and livestock deaths. Her neighbors claimed she cursed their land. The trial records mentioned testimony about offerings, bowls of milk, and coins left at her door, a traditional practice meant to appease harmful spirits or witches. The offerings were meant as payment, protection money, a way to avoid her supposed wrath. I didn't empty the bowls the next morning. I left them there, watched them from a distance. By noon, the milk had soured in the sun. By evening, it was gone, not spilled, not absorbed into the ground. Gone. The bowls sat empty. The coins vanished. The following morning, they were filled again. Fresh milk, 7 coins, waiting. I spoke with a local historian, a woman who specialized in colonial New England folklore. I didn't mention the bowls specifically, just asked about offering practices. She explained that some believed leaving milk and coins could either placate a witch or bind a spirit. The number 7 is significant, she said. 7 coins, 7 days, 7 years. It's protective numerology. If someone believed a witch was buried nearby, they might leave offerings to keep the spirit satisfied, to prevent it from wandering. For how long? I asked. Until the offering is refused, she said, or until someone breaks the pattern. I'd broken it. I'd emptied the bowls, taken the coins, removed the offerings from their place, and now they multiplied, appearing faster than I could remove them. That week, 4 bowls appeared, then 6, then 9, all filled with milk and coins, all dated 1823, all arranged in expanding circles around Constance Miller's grave. I stopped emptying them. I stopped touching them. I left them where they appeared and watched as the pattern grew. On the 7th morning after I first found the bowl, I arrived at dawn. 21 bowls surrounded the oak tree, arranged in 3 concentric circles, all filled and waiting, and standing beside Constance's grave was a woman. She wore a long, dark dress, her hair covered with a bonnet, her face pale in the early light. She looked at me, her expression neither hostile nor welcoming, just watchful. I didn't move, didn't speak. She knelt, placed her hands on one of the bowls, and then she was gone. Not walked away, just absent, as if she'd never been there. The bowls remained. I checked them every morning for a week. The milk never spoiled, the coins never tarnished, and gradually, one by one, the bowls began to disappear. Not removed by human hands, they simply ceased to be there. By the end of the month, only one remained, nestled between the roots where I'd first found it. I leave it alone now. Every morning, it's filled with fresh milk and 7 coins dated 1823. By evening, the offerings are gone, the bowl empty, and each dawn it's replenished. I've stopped questioning it. I've stopped trying to understand who fills it or where the coins come from. Some patterns are older than understanding, older than logic. They're maintained by belief, by memory, by the weight of accusations that linger long after the accused is buried. Constance Miller was acquitted in life, but she's still receiving offerings in death. And I've learned that some rituals aren't mine to interrupt. They belong to the ground, to the tree, to the woman whose name is carved in slate beneath branches that have outlived everyone who accused her. The bowl stays. The offerings continue, and I walk past them every morning with my rake and my shears, tending to the graves of people who've been dead for centuries, learning that some are still more present than we'd like to believe. I found the coins I'd taken, the ones from the first 2 bowls. I brought them back, placed them in the bowl one evening after closing. By morning, they were gone, replaced by 7 new coins, all identical, all dated 1823. The tree stands, the bowl waits, and Constance Miller's grave remains the most carefully tended plot in Section A, not by my hand, but by something that remembers when offerings were necessary, when milk and coins bought safety, when accusations could kill but couldn't silence. I don't empty the bowl anymore, and I never will again. I've touched thousands of hands in my career, but only one left a mark that wouldn't wash away. My name is Silas Brennan, and I've worked as a licensed embalmer at Westview Funeral Home in Burlington, Vermont, for the past 23 years. The work is technical, precise, and intimate in ways most people never consider. You learn to see death as a process, something manageable and understood, governed by biology and chemistry. There's comfort in that certainty, or there was, until I prepared Arthur Dennison and learned that some stains transfer in ways science doesn't explain. Arthur arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in mid September, 84 years old, died peacefully at home, according to the paperwork, survived by a daughter who lived in out of state. Natural causes, no autopsy required, straightforward case. The transport team brought him in at 2, and I scheduled his preparation for 3:30, giving me plenty of time before the evening viewing scheduled for the next day. I began with my standard pre-embalming examination. I checked for pacemakers, documented any surgical scars, verified identity against the intake photos. Arthur was a small man, thin from age, liver spots across his arms and chest, the typical signs of someone who'd lived a long, ordinary life. Everything appeared routine until I examined his hands. His left hand was black, not the purple gray of lividity, not the green black of decomposition. This was different, a deep, sooty black that covered his entire palm and the inside of his fingers, as if he'd been handling charcoal or ash. But it was too uniform, too complete, and it was only the left hand. The right was pale, normal, age-spotted but clean. I checked the intake notes. Nothing about occupational staining, no mention of chemicals or environmental exposure. I gloved up and touched the stained skin. It wasn't loose or degraded. The tissue was intact, firm, well preserved. The black wasn't on the surface, it was in the skin, deep enough that pressing my thumb against it didn't smudge or transfer. I tried washing it, standard soap first, then a gentle solvent we use for stubborn staining. The black didn't fade. I tried a scrub brush, careful not to damage the skin. Nothing. The stain remained absolute, as if it had been tattooed into the dermal layer. I made a note in my preparation log and continued. Sometimes bodies present anomalies, medication reactions, environmental exposure, conditions that manifest oddly in death. I'd document it, mention it to the family if they asked, and proceed with the embalming. The stain wouldn't affect the viewing. Arthur would wear gloves if necessary. I began the arterial injection, working methodically, monitoring the fluid distribution. Everything proceeded normally. The tissue firmed, the color improved, the preservation took hold as expected. I worked for 90 minutes, completing the standard procedure, then dressed Arthur in the clothing the family had provided, a navy suit, white shirt, simple tie. His hands folded naturally over his abdomen, the black left palm face down, hidden beneath his right hand. When I finished, I cleaned my instruments and stripped off my gloves. That's when I noticed my own left palm. There was a smudge across it, black, sooty, roughly the size of a thumbprint. I'd been wearing gloves the entire time, double gloved, as I always am during arterial work. But there it was, stark against my skin. I washed my hands. The smudge didn't budge. I used the same solvent I'd tried on Arthur. Nothing. I scrubbed with a brush until my palm was red and raw. The black remained, settling deeper as if my efforts were driving it further into my skin rather than removing it. I looked at Arthur, lying peaceful and composed in the preparation room. His left hand was still black, still stained, but now my hand carried an echo of it. A transfer that shouldn't have been possible through 2 layers of latex and nitrile. I told myself it was residue, something I'd touched after removing my gloves, contamination from the cleaning agents or the embalming fluids. I bandaged my palm to protect the raw skin and finished my workday. By evening, the stain had darkened. By morning, it covered my entire palm, identical in shade and coverage to Arthur's. I called the family, asked if Arthur had worked with any substances that might cause skin staining. His daughter was confused. He was a retired accountant, she said, worked with numbers his whole life, nothing that would stain. I asked if he'd been ill, if he'd undergone any treatments. No, she said. He was healthy until the very end. Went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. The doctor said it was his heart. I scheduled an appointment with my own doctor that afternoon. He examined my palm, tested the stain with various solvents, took a small skin sample for analysis. It looks like silver nitrate staining, he said, but that usually fades with time, and it responds to treatment. This doesn't behave like anything I've seen. The biopsy results came back inconclusive. The stain was present in the tissue, but showed no chemical composition that matched known substances. It's like your skin is expressing melanin in an impossible concentration, the dermatologist explained, but melanin doesn't appear this way. It doesn't transfer. I can't explain what this is. Arthur's viewing was that evening. I stood at the back of the room, my bandaged hand hidden in my pocket, watching the family pay their respects. His daughter spent a long time at the casket, holding his right hand, speaking softly. She didn't touch his left hand, and yet she didn't seem to notice the stain. After the family left, I approached the casket for a final check before sealing it for transport to the crematory the next morning. I adjusted Arthur's tie, straightened his lapel, and then I saw his right hand. The palm that had been clean, age-spotted but normal, was now marked with a black smudge, small, faint, but unmistakable, roughly the size of a thumbprint. I looked at my own bandaged palm. The stain had spread to my fingers now, creeping toward my wrist. I sealed the casket that night. The cremation proceeded the next day without incident. The family collected Arthur's ashes and held a small memorial service. Everything concluded normally, professionally, with the dignity the family deserved, but the stain on my hand didn't fade. Weeks passed, then months. I visited specialists, underwent tests, tried treatments ranging from laser therapy to chemical peels. Nothing worked. The black remained, dark and absolute, a perfect handprint on my left palm. I started researching old funeral customs, embalming practices from other cultures, folklore about death and transference. I found references in Victorian mourning traditions to death marks, stains that appeared on those who prepared bodies, believed to be signs of spiritual contamination or curses transferred from the deceased. Most accounts dismissed them as superstition, examples of poor hygiene, or occupational hazards before modern safety protocols. but some accounts described marks that couldn't be removed, stains that lasted lifetimes, passed from the dead to the living through touch. Protection rituals varied by culture: saltwater baths, prayer, burning sage, but the common thread was this: once marked, you carried something of the dead with you, a reminder, a connection, a debt. I found Arthur's obituary online, read it carefully. Standard information: birth date, career, survived by one daughter. But at the bottom, a line I'd missed before: Arthur was preceded in death by his wife, Margaret, and his son, Thomas. I pulled Thomas Dennison's death certificate from public records. He'd died at age 9 in 1967. Cause of death: drowning. Location: Lake Champlain. The report noted that Arthur had been present, had pulled his son from the water, had attempted resuscitation, had held the boy's body for hours on the shore, refusing to let go, his hands covered in lake mud and silt, his left hand, the hand that had held his son, the hand that couldn't save him. I don't know if the stain is grief made visible, or guilt, or something that waited in Arthur's skin for 56 years until he died and passed it on to the next person who touched that hand with care. I don't know if it's a curse or simply a mark of witness, a reminder that every body carries stories we can't see until they're ready to be told. What I know is this: the stain remains. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't spread beyond my palm now. But it's there, dark and permanent, a shadow from someone else's tragedy that I carry with me every day. I still work as an embalmer. I still prepare bodies with the same care and respect I always have. But now I wear 3 layers of gloves, and I never touch a hand without checking first, without wondering what invisible marks wait to transfer, what stories are looking for someone to carry them forward. And sometimes, late at night, I feel my left palm grow cold, as if it's remembering water, remembering a child's small hand slipping away, remembering the weight of loss that Arthur Dennison carried in silence for more than half a century. The stain is mine now. His story is mine now. And I wonder if that's what it wanted all along. Not to curse me, but simply to be remembered by someone who would understand the weight of holding death in your hands and knowing you couldn't stop it. I check my palm every morning, and every morning the black remains, dark as lake water, deep as grief, permanent as the mark we leave on everyone we touch. Fire is predictable in my line of work, something we control and prevent, until I found flames that burned without consuming anything except my certainty. My name is Jonah Price, and I've worked as a cemetery maintenance supervisor at Pinewood Memorial Gardens in Boise, Idaho, for the past 18 years. I oversee a staff of 6, manage grounds upkeep, coordinate with funeral directors, and handle safety protocols across our 140-acre property. Fire prevention is a major concern, especially during Idaho's dry summers. We prohibit open flames, monitor for wildfire risk, and enforce strict rules about candles and offerings. Those rules exist for good reason, and I've always taken them seriously. Until Roque made me question whether some flames follow different rules entirely. The candles first appeared in early August. I found them during my evening rounds, just before we locked the gates at 7. Three white candles, maybe 6 inches tall, arranged in a triangle on top of grave marker K-42. They were lit, flames burning steady in the still evening air. I checked the grave. Marianne Walsh, born 1971, died this past June. Recent burial, fresh grief. Family probably thought candlelight was appropriate tribute. I extinguished them with my fingers, pinching each wick quickly. Standard procedure. I collected the candles, noted the violation in my log, and disposed of them in the trash behind the maintenance building. I made a mental note to check for them the next day, to speak with the family if they returned. They returned. Same location, 3 white candles arranged in a triangle, all burning. I extinguished them again, this time looking more carefully at the candles themselves. They were plain, unscented, simple cylindrical pillars. The wax was white, smooth, unremarkable. I disposed of them and checked the cemetery's security footage. The cameras showed the grave at 6:15 in the evening. No candles. At 6:45, I appeared in the frame, walking my rounds. The candles were already there, already burning, but no one had placed them, no visitor, no vehicle, no figure approaching the grave. They simply existed between camera sweeps, lit and waiting. I increased monitoring, checked row K every hour during my shift. At 5, no candles. At 6, 3 candles burning. At 7, I extinguished them. At 8, checking footage from the overnight camera, 3 new candles appeared at approximately 6 the following evening. This pattern continued for a week. Same time, same location, same 3 candles arranged in a triangle, flames burning without flicker or variation. I stopped disposing of them and started examining them instead. I measured them the first day I collected them, 6 inches tall, 2 inches in diameter. The next day, I measured them again. Still 6 inches. The flames had burned for at least an hour, but the candles showed no height loss, no melted wax, no consumption at all. I let them burn longer, 2 hours. 3. By the time I extinguished them at 7:30, they should have burned down at least an inch. They remained 6 inches tall. The wax was cool to the touch, not warm from the flame. The wicks were blackened but intact, not shortened. I tested one in the maintenance building using a lighter to see how it burned under controlled conditions. The flame caught immediately, burned with the same steady quality. I watched it for 30 minutes. The candle didn't melt. No wax pooled at the base. No drips ran down the sides. The flame consumed nothing, produced no visible smoke, gave off no heat beyond what I felt directly above the wick. I called the Walsh family, asked about the candles. Marianne's husband was confused. "We haven't left any candles," he said. "The cemetery doesn't allow them. We've been bringing flowers." I asked about Marianne's preferences, her beliefs, anything that might explain a ritual. "She wasn't religious," he said. "She was a school teacher. She liked practical things. This doesn't sound like her." I examined the candles more closely. The wax had a texture that bothered me, something I couldn't identify. Too smooth, too uniform. I scraped a small sample with my knife. The shaving curled differently than wax should, held together in a way that seemed fibrous rather than solid. I smelled it. Hair, burning hair, faint but unmistakable. I put the candle down, stepped back, looked at the three pillars sitting on my workbench, flames still burning, wax that wasn't wax. I used a magnifying glass, examined the surface. There were patterns in it, microscopic striations that looked organic, cellular, like the candle was made from compressed fibers rather than rendered fat or petroleum. I researched candle making that night, found historical references to unusual materials: bayberry, beeswax, tallow, paraffin, all standard. But deeper in historical texts, I found mentions of mourning candles made from the hair of the deceased, a practice in some European traditions. Hair was braided, compressed, treated with oils until it formed solid cylinders that could be burned as memorial offerings. The practice was rare, considered morbid even in the 19th century, but it existed. I checked Marianne Walsh's burial records. Standard service, cremation, ashes interred in the memorial garden. No hair preservation, no unusual requests, nothing that would explain candles made from human hair appearing on her grave every evening. But they continued. Every night at 6, 3 candles appeared, already burning. I stopped extinguishing them, started documenting instead. Photographs, measurements, observations. The flames never wavered, the candles never shortened, and each night the smell grew stronger, burnt hair, acrid and organic, hanging in the air around row K. Other staff noticed. My assistant, Carlos, refused to walk row K after 5:30. Something's wrong there, he said. I can feel it. The air is different. He was right. The temperature around grave K-42 dropped noticeably in the evening, even during August heat. The grass in a perfect circle around the marker began to yellow, as if the ground itself was being drained, and the candles kept burning, night after night, consuming nothing but somehow taking something from the space around them. I contacted a paranormal investigator, someone academic rather than theatrical. She came out one evening, brought equipment, took readings. The electromagnetic field here is unusual, she said, standing near the grave. Not strong, but patterned, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. She examined the candles with professional detachment. These aren't commercially made, she said. The material is organic, probably keratin based. Hair, nails, something similar. Old mourning practice, but they shouldn't be appearing spontaneously. Someone is placing them. No one is placing them, I said. I've watched. They just appear. She looked at me carefully. Then someone, or something, wants you to know they're here. Candles are communication, light in darkness, memory made visible. These aren't a threat. They're a message. What's the message? That depends on Marianne Walsh, she said. What was left unfinished? What needs to be remembered? I researched Marianne's life. Schoolteacher, as her husband said, taught 4th grade for 20 years. Died of a brain aneurysm, sudden and unexpected, no warning, no goodbye. Left behind a husband, 2 teenage daughters, and 27 students who'd been in her class that year. I contacted the school, asked about memorial services. They'd held one in June, shortly after her death. Students made cards, wrote letters, shared memories. The letters had been collected, the principal said, but never delivered to the family. They'd been boxed up, stored in the office, forgotten in the chaos of end of year activities. I asked if I could pick them up, drove to the school, collected a cardboard box containing 27 letters written in children's handwriting. I brought them to the cemetery that evening, placed them at the base of Marianne's marker just before 6. At 6, the candles appeared. 3 flames, burning steady, but this time they burned for exactly 3 minutes and then went out. Not extinguished, completed, the wicks blackened, the flames faded, and the candles remained standing, 6 inches tall, finally cooling, finally finished. I delivered the letters to Marianne's family the next day. Her daughters read them, cried, thanked me for finding something they didn't know existed. 27 children saying goodbye, saying thank you, saying they'd remember her. The candles never appeared again. Row K returned to normal temperature. The yellowed grass greened within days. The space felt settled, quiet, the way a cemetery should feel. I kept one of the candles. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed something to remind me that fire can burn without consuming, that light can appear without source, that some messages wait in flame until someone is ready to read them. I examined it one last time under the magnifying glass. The fibers were definitely hair, braided so tightly they formed solid wax-like structures. Human hair, I think. Maybe Marianne's own, somehow transformed, somehow used to call attention to what had been forgotten. The candle sits in my office now, unlit, a reminder that my job isn't just about preventing fire and maintaining grounds. Sometimes it's about reading the signs the dead leave for us, about understanding that candles in a cemetery aren't always hazards. Sometimes they're just grief made visible, memory made light, a mother reaching across death to make sure her students' words found their way home. I don't extinguish candles as quickly now. I watch them first. Wonder what they're trying to say. I've learned to listen carefully in my work, but I never expected to hear a voice reciting the names of people who hadn't died yet. My name is Celeste Morgan, and I've served as cemetery director at Riverside Gardens Cemetery in Charleston, South Carolina, for the past 15 years. I manage daily operations for a 70-acre historic property that dates back to 1843, coordinate with families during their most difficult moments, and ensure the grounds remain a place of dignity and peace. The work requires attention to detail, organizational skill, and the ability to maintain composure in emotionally charged situations. I've always prided myself on staying calm, on being the steady presence families need. That steadiness faltered the evening. I heard someone whispering names in section 22. It was late September, that transitional period when summer heat finally breaks and evening air turns cool. I was doing my final walkthrough before locking the gates at 7, checking for any maintenance issues, ensuring visitors had departed. Section 22 is in the older part of the cemetery, established in the 1860s, where magnolia trees cast long shadows over weathered marble stones and brick crypts. It's quiet there, peaceful in the way only old cemeteries can be. I heard the whispering near plot 22 C. At first, I thought it was wind through the magnolia leaves, that rustling whisper that sounds almost like voices. But as I stood still, listening, I realized it was too rhythmic, too patterned. Someone was speaking, not loudly, not urgently, just a steady murmur of words I couldn't quite distinguish. I followed the sound to a grave marker, a simple gray granite stone, maybe 3 feet tall. Elizabeth Thornton, born 1841, died 1903. The whispering seemed to come from the base of the stone, from the ground itself. I crouched down, pressed my ear close to the earth. The voice was clearer there, a woman's voice, soft and measured, reciting something in a steady cadence. I couldn't make out individual words. The volume was too low, the articulation too obscured, but the rhythm was unmistakable. A list. Someone was reading a list. I stood up, looked around. The cemetery was empty, no visitors, no other staff, no one within 100 yards of where I stood. The whispering continued, unaffected by my movement. I checked my watch, 6:35. I had 25 minutes before closing. I walked back to my office, retrieved a digital voice recorder we kept for documenting family meetings, and returned to plot 22 C. The whispering was still there, constant and unchanging. I placed the recorder on top of the headstone and let it run for 10 minutes. The sound was faint enough that I wasn't certain it would capture anything, but I needed to know if I was imagining this, if stress or fatigue was creating auditory illusions. I collected the recorder at 6:50, locked the gates, and drove home. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with headphones, playing back the recording. For the first minute, nothing but ambient sound, birds, distant traffic, wind. Then, at 1 minute 40 seconds, a voice emerged. Clear, distinct, undeniably real. A woman's voice speaking in measured tones. Robert Stillman, Catherine Gray, James Whitfield, Margaret Alcott, Samuel Kerr. She continued for 7 minutes, reciting name after name in the same steady rhythm. I counted 43 names total. Then silence. I sat there, headphones still on, feeling cold despite the warm evening. I recognized some of the names. Robert Stillman, buried in Section 22, Plot 18. Catherine Gray, Section 22, Plot 9. I opened my laptop and cross-referenced the cemetery database. All 43 names matched burials in Section 22, all within approximately 50 feet of Elizabeth Thornton's grave. But two names at the end of the list made my hands shake. Thomas Eckhart, Virginia Ross. Thomas Eckhart and Virginia Ross weren't buried in Section 22. They weren't buried anywhere in Riverside Gardens. I searched our complete records. Nothing. I searched obituaries, death certificates, local funeral homes. No Thomas Eckhart, no Virginia Ross, not in Charleston, not recently, not in any database I could access. I told myself it was coincidence, that the names were common enough, that maybe I'd heard wrong. I played the recording again. The pronunciation was clear. Thomas Eckhart. Virginia Ross. I went back to plot 22-C the next evening. The whispering had stopped. I placed the recorder again, let it run for 30 minutes, nothing but ambient sound. Whatever had been speaking was silent now. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Palmetto Funeral Home. They were arranging a burial for Thomas Eckhart, 87, died of heart failure. The family had purchased a plot in Section 22. Plot 23, approximately 40 feet from Elizabeth Thornton's grave. I felt sick. I pulled the recording, listened to it again. Thomas Eckhart, clear as daylight, spoken 3 weeks before he died. I attended the burial service, standing at a respectful distance. Thomas Eckhart was a retired postal worker, lifelong Charleston resident, survived by 3 children and 7 grandchildren. A normal life, a normal death, a normal burial. Nothing to explain why his name had been whispered from the ground weeks before he died. 2 months later, Virginia Ross, 91, died peacefully in her sleep. Her daughter contacted me about burial arrangements. The family plot was in Section 22, Plot 15, less than 30 feet from Elizabeth Thornton's grave. I didn't tell anyone about the recording. How could I? What would I say? That a dead woman's grave whispered names 2 months before people died? That something in the ground knew who was coming next? I researched Elizabeth Thornton. Birth records, death records, census data from the 1800s. She lived in Charleston her entire life, never married, worked as a seamstress, died at 62 of influenza during the 1903 epidemic. Buried in a plot purchased by her sister. Nothing unusual, nothing that explained why her grave would become a roll call for the dead. But I found something in the Charleston Historical Archives. A diary entry from Elizabeth's sister, written in 1904, 1 year after Elizabeth's death. I visit her grave weekly and speak the names of those who have passed, as she requested. She always said the dead shouldn't be forgotten, that someone should remember them all. I honor that wish. The sister died in 1926. The diary made no mention of whether she continued the practice, whether anyone took over the recitation of names after her death. But the tradition had started, someone speaking names at Elizabeth's grave, creating a record of the dead, ensuring they were remembered. I returned to plot 22-C one evening in November, brought the recorder, waited. At 6:35, the whispering resumed. Same voice, same steady cadence. I let the recorder run for 20 minutes. Later, in my office, I listened to the new recording. The voice recited 41 names. I recognized 40 of them. Recent burials in Section 22. People who had died in the past 3 months. The 41st name was unfamiliar. Lawrence Pritchard. I searched the database. No Lawrence Pritchard in our records. No pending arrangements. I waited, sick with anticipation and dread. 5 weeks later, Lawrence Pritchard died. 73, stroke. His son contacted me about burial options. I showed him available plots. He chose Section 22, Plot 27, less than 50 feet from Elizabeth Thornton's grave. The voice knows, somehow, impossibly, It knows who will be buried in Section 22 before they die. It recites their names in advance, adding them to a list that started over a century ago when a seamstress asked her sister to remember the dead. I've stopped recording it. I've stopped trying to understand it. Some things operate on rules we can't access, following patterns older than explanation. Elizabeth Thornton's grave whispers names, and eventually, inevitably, those people die and are buried nearby. Coincidence becomes prophecy, becomes routine. I walk past plot 22 C every evening during my rounds. Sometimes I hear the whispering, sometimes I don't. I never stop to listen anymore. I don't want to know whose name is being spoken. I don't want to carry that knowledge, that certainty of death approaching, but I maintain Elizabeth's grave with extra care now. Keep the grass trimmed, the stone clean, the area clear of debris, because she's doing something I can't, keeping track of everyone who rests in Section 22, speaking their names into the ground, ensuring they're remembered even if no one living knows to listen. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all the dead need. Someone to speak their name, to acknowledge they existed, to add them to a list that's been growing for over 100 years in the quiet evening air of an old Charleston cemetery. I've started saying the names myself sometimes. Not the new ones, not the ones I haven't heard yet, just the ones already buried, already at rest. I stand at Elizabeth's grave and speak them aloud. Robert Stillman, Catherine Gray, James Whitfield, adding my voice to hers, acknowledging the tradition she started and the sister who honored it, and the strange inheritance that continues whether we understand it or not. The whispering continues, the names accumulate, and Section 22 remains the most carefully documented area of Riverside Gardens, not in our official records, but in the voice that rises from the ground each evening, patient and eternal, remembering everyone the world has forgotten. I just hope my own name stays off that list for a long, long time, though I suspect when it's spoken, I won't be around to hear it, and maybe that's a blessing. I never thought cutting grass could summon the dead, but I learned that some things are meant to stay woven together. My name is Eli Kovach, and I've worked as head groundskeeper at Maplewood Cemetery in Ann Arbor, Michigan, for the past 13 years. I maintain 60 acres of burial grounds, manage a crew of 3, and ensure every plot receives proper care. The work is straightforward: mowing, trimming, edging, seasonal planting. I know every section, every row, every stone that needs special attention. I take pride in the details, in making sure families see their loved ones' graves kept with dignity. That attention to detail is what made me notice the knots appearing in Section 9, and that same attention nearly cost me more than I understood. The grass started nodding in early May. I was doing my weekly inspection of Section 9, the area reserved for burials from the 1950s through 70s. The plots were well established, most families still visiting regularly. Maintenance needs minimal. But one grave caught my eye immediately. Plot 9 17. Helen Carver, born 1928, died 1967. The grass directly above her plot was braided, not matted or tangled by wind, deliberately braided into intricate patterns, small sections woven together like hair, forming geometric designs maybe 6 inches across. 3 of them, arranged in a triangle over where I estimated the center of the casket would be. I crouched down, examined them closely. The braiding was precise, tight, the kind of work that required patience and small fingers. Each braid was tied off at the end with a strand of grass twisted into a knot. The patterns were beautiful in a strange way, like folk art or basket weaving translated to living grass. I checked the surrounding area. No footprints, no signs of disturbance. The ground was firm, the grass undamaged except for the braiding itself. I'd mowed this section 3 days ago. The grass had been normal then, I was certain. These patterns had appeared in the past 72 hours. I photographed them and made a note in my log. Vandalism seemed unlikely. The work was too delicate, too precise, but I couldn't imagine who would braid grass on a grave, or why. I decided to leave them for a few days, see if they appeared elsewhere, if a pattern emerged. They multiplied. By the end of the week, 9 braided sections covered Helen Carver's grave, all in geometric patterns, all tied off with grass strand knots. I checked other graves in section 9. Only Helen's showed the braiding. I researched her. Helen Carver died at 39, survived by her husband Robert and 2 young daughters. Cause of death, complications from surgery. The obituary mentioned she'd been a weaver, had operated a small loom in her home, sold handmade textiles at local markets. She'd been known for intricate patterns, traditional designs passed down from her grandmother. The connection was obvious. Someone who knew Helen was braiding grass as tribute, recreating her art in the only medium available at her grave. It was touching, really, unusual, but harmless. I decided to leave the braids intact, let the family express their grief in their own way. By mid-May, the entire plot was covered. Dozens of braids, hundreds of individual grass strands woven together, forming a carpet of patterns that shifted in the wind like textile art. It was extraordinary. I took photographs to show my supervisor, to document what I considered a unique expression of mourning. Then the grass started dying, not all of it, just the braided sections. The woven strands turned brown, withered, while the unbraided grass around them remained green and healthy. Within days, the patterns became brittle, broke apart when touched. The grave looked diseased, patchy with dead grass in geometric arrangements. I couldn't leave it like that. Families visited Section 9 regularly, and Helen's plot was becoming an eyesore. I made the decision to cut away the dead braids, remove them completely, and let new grass fill in. It was the professional thing to do, the practical choice. I should have asked first. I should have understood what I was undoing. I cut the braids on a Thursday afternoon, used hand shears to trim away each dead pattern carefully, bagged the clippings, raked the bare spots smooth. The plot looked better immediately. Clean, maintained, professional. I reseeded the bare patches and moved on to other maintenance tasks. Friday morning, I received a call from Robert Carver, Helen's widower, now 83, still living in Ann Arbor. His voice was shaking. "What did you do to my wife's grave?" he asked. I explained about the dead grass, the maintenance, the reseeding. "The plot looks much better now," I assured him. "New grass will fill in within 2 weeks." "You cut away the braids," he said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes, they died. I had to remove them." Silence, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, "She came back last night." I didn't understand. "Sir?" "Helen. I saw her in my kitchen, 2 in the morning. I got up for water, and she was standing by the window, just standing there, not moving, not speaking. She was pointing at something outside. When I turned to look, she was gone." I felt cold despite the warm morning. "Mr. Carver, grief can cause—" "I'm not grieving," he interrupted. "Not anymore. I mourned my wife 57 years ago. I've made peace. But last night, she was in my kitchen, and she looked angry." I didn't know what to say. I assured him I'd check the grave, make sure everything was in order. He hung up without saying goodbye. I drove out to plot 9-17. The grass I'd reseeded was already sprouting, impossibly fast, but Michigan soil can be fertile. Except the new growth wasn't random. It was coming up in patterns. Braids were forming again, small green strands weaving themselves together as they grew, recreating the designs I'd cut away. I watched for 10 minutes, unable to move. The grass was braiding itself, strands curling around each other, pulling together, knotting at the ends, growing and weaving simultaneously, restoring what I'd destroyed. I called a colleague, an older groundskeeper who'd worked cemeteries for 40 years, told him what I was seeing. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Some people leave pieces of themselves behind, muscle memory, habits so deep they continue after death. If she was a weaver, if that's who she was at her core, maybe that's what's left. The pattern, the work. Don't cut it again." I didn't. The braids filled in over the next week, covering Helen's grave in intricate designs that shifted and changed. Some patterns lasted days, others weeks. The grass stayed green now, healthy, tended by hands I couldn't see. Robert Carver called me a week later. "She hasn't come back," he said. "Not since you stopped cutting the braids." "I won't touch them again," I promised. "Thank you," he said. "She always said her work was her prayer. Maybe that's what this is. She's still praying." I maintain Helen Carver's grave differently now. I mow around it, careful not to disturb the braided sections. I edge the perimeter, keep the surrounding plots pristine, but the patterns themselves I leave untouched. They change with the seasons, complex in summer when the grass grows fast, simpler in fall when growth slows. In winter, they disappear beneath snow, but each spring they return, the first green shoots already beginning to weave. Other groundskeepers have noticed. Some think it's wind patterns, some think it's insects or moles creating the designs. I let them believe what they want. I know better. I've seen the grass move on windless days, seen strands pull together when nothing visible touches them. I've researched grass knotting traditions, found references in Celtic folklore, in Appalachian superstitions, knots as protection, as communication, as ways to bind the living and dead, braiding as meditation, as prayer, as the physical manifestation of pattern and order imposed on chaos. Helen Carver was a weaver. I spent 39 years creating patterns, imposing beauty on raw material, finding order in thread and fiber. Death didn't stop that impulse, it just changed the medium. I've started documenting the patterns, photographing them weekly. They never repeat exactly. Each design is unique, appears for a period, then transforms into something new. It's like watching an artist's ongoing exhibition, a body of work that spans decades beyond her death. Sometimes, early in the morning when I'm alone in Section 9, I see strands moving, just brief glimpses, grass pulling together, weaving itself, guided by intention I can't see but can no longer deny. It's beautiful. It's impossible. It's Helen Carver still doing what she loved, still creating, still finding patterns in the chaos. I don't cut the braids anymore. I protect them, make sure no one else disturbs them. Because I learned that some work is eternal, some patterns are too important to break, and some things the dead leave behind aren't meant to be trimmed away and forgotten. They're meant to grow, to weave, to continue the only prayer they know how to speak. Helen's grave is the most beautiful plot in Maplewood Cemetery now. Families stop to look at it, wonder at the patterns, take photographs. No one knows how the grass does it. No one but me understands what they're really seeing. Art that outlasted death, prayer that grows from the ground. A weaver who never stopped working, even when the only thread left was grass growing over her grave. I keep it green, I keep it safe, and I never, ever cut the braids. I thought I understood the purpose of nails in burial, to seal caskets, to hold things closed, until I removed four that were meant to keep something down. My name is Nora Weston, and I've worked as a funeral assistant at Green Hill Memorial Services in Savannah, Georgia for the past 9 years. I coordinate with families, manage burial logistics, ensure graveside services proceed smoothly, and handle the countless details that make a funeral dignified and meaningful. The work requires attention to protocol, respect for tradition, and the understanding that every family grieves differently. I thought I'd seen every variation of burial custom, every ritual meant to honor the dead. I was wrong about what some rituals are actually meant to do. The Hammond burial took place on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. Gerald Hammond, 78, retired dock worker, died of heart failure after a brief hospitalization. The family was large: 3 adult children, 7 grandchildren, extended relatives and friends, filling 24 chairs under the graveside tent. It was a standard service, respectfully conducted, properly executed. I oversaw the logistics, ensured the casket was positioned correctly, coordinated with the cemetery crew, and stood at a respectful distance while the pastor delivered the committal. After the service concluded and the family departed, I remained to supervise the burial completion. This is standard procedure. Someone from the funeral home stays until the grave is filled and the site is restored. The cemetery crew began their work with the backhoe, carefully replacing earth over the vault and casket. I was checking final details on my tablet when one of the crew members called me over. Someone left something, he said, pointing to the four corners of the grave. At each corner, driven deep into the softened earth, was an iron nail, not decorative, not modern. These were old, hand-forged nails, maybe 6 inches long, black with age and oxidation. They'd been hammered into the ground at perfect right angles to the grave, marking the four corners like boundary posts. I checked my service notes, no mention of corner markers, no family requests for special placement of objects. I called Gerald's daughters, Sarah, who'd handled the arrangements. Did your family place iron nails at the grave corners? I asked. Iron nails? She sounded confused. No, why would we do that? I explained what we'd found. She was quiet for a moment. Maybe it's a cemetery thing? A marker for the grounds crew? I thanked her and checked with the cemetery director. He'd never heard of such a practice. Probably something historical, he said. Savannah has a lot of old burial traditions. Could be from a previous interment. Just remove them and dispose of them. I should have researched first. I should have understood what I was pulling up. But I was operating on protocol and practical thinking. Objects left at graves are either meaningful to families and should be verified, or debris that needs removal. The family said the nails weren't theirs. So I removed them. I pulled at each nail with a claw hammer, worked them carefully out of the earth. They were driven deep, took significant effort to extract. The iron was rough, pitted, clearly very old. I bagged them to show the cemetery director, thinking they might have historical value. The crew finished filling the grave, mounded the earth properly, arranged the flowers. Everything looked appropriate, respectful, complete. I drove away at 4:30, satisfied the service had been properly concluded. The cemetery director called me at 6 the next morning. You need to get to the Hammond plot, now. I arrived 20 minutes later. What I saw made my hands go numb. The grave had been disturbed, the mounded earth was scattered, pushed aside, creating a depression in the center. It wasn't completely excavated, the casket wasn't visible, but something had dug down at least 3 feet, displacing hundreds of pounds of soil. The cemetery director stood at the edge, his face pale. Look at this, he said, pointing to the dirt pile beside the grave. Mixed with the earth were scratch marks, deep gouges, like something with claws had torn through the soil, but the marks were massive, the spacing between claw tracks wider than my hand. No animal I knew could create marks like that. Vandalism, I asked, though I didn't believe it. With what? He said. You'd need excavation equipment to move this much earth overnight. And those marks, he pointed again. I've never seen anything like them. We called the police. 2 officers arrived, examined the scene, took photographs. Could be wild hogs, one suggested. They'll root up graves sometimes, looking for buried offerings. But the marks weren't consistent with hog rooting. They were too purposeful, too directed. Something had dug straight down toward the casket with clear intent. The family was devastated. We arranged for the grave to be repaired, the casket checked for damage. The cemetery crew excavated properly, using machinery, careful not to disturb the vault. When they reached the casket and opened the vault lid, one of the workers called me over. "You need to see this," he said quietly. The casket lid bore marks, deep scratches in the metal, concentrated around the seal, as if something had been trying to open it. The scratches were fresh, the metal bright where it had been scored. Some marks had penetrated through the protective coating to the steel beneath. I felt sick. "Is the seal intact?" I asked. He checked carefully. Yes, whatever did this couldn't get through, but it tried hard. We closed the vault without telling the family about the scratches, refilled the grave. This time, I watched carefully. Before the crew began covering the casket, I saw something that made my breath catch. At each corner of the vault, where the iron nails had been positioned above ground, VSS, concrete showed stress marks, small crickets radiating from 4 points, as if tremendous pressure had been applied from below, pushing upward at exactly those locations. I researched that evening, found references to iron nails in burial practices, specifically in European and early American traditions. Iron was believed to bind spirits, to keep them from rising, to prevent the dead from walking. 4 nails at the cardinal points created a spiritual barrier, a cage of iron that held souls in place. The practice was most common in cases where the deceased was feared, suspected witches, criminals, those who died violently or with an unfinished business. The nails weren't decoration, they were restraint. I found Gerald Hammond's full obituary, read beyond the standard biographical information. He'd been a dock worker, yes, but before that, before he came to Savannah, there was a gap in his history. 10 years unaccounted for in his early 20s. I searched deeper, found archived newspaper articles from a small town in rural Georgia. 1967. Gerald Hammond, then 23, questioned in connection with the disappearance of 3 local children. No charges filed, insufficient evidence. But the suspicion followed him. He left town shortly after, moved to Savannah, started over. The children were never found. I don't know if Gerald was guilty. I'll never know. But someone believed he was, someone who knew the old ways, who remembered how to keep the guilty dead from rising, who drove iron nails into the corners of his grave. When I removed those nails, I broke the binding. Whatever was kept down, guilt, rage, unfinished hunger, tried to free itself. The scratches on the casket proved that. The displaced earth proved that. The claw marks that looked like nothing natural proved that. I replaced the nails. Didn't tell the cemetery director. Didn't file a report. I simply drove back to the Hammond plot after dark, hammered 4 new iron nails into the corners, deep as I could drive them. Bought them from a historical blacksmith, paid extra for hand-forged iron, the old kind, the kind that carries weight beyond its physical properties. The grave hasn't been disturbed since. The grass has grown in, the flowers are regularly replaced, the plot looks peaceful and maintained, but I check it every week. Make sure the nails are still there, still driven flush with the ground at the 4 corners. And I've changed my protocol. When I find objects placed at graves, especially old objects, iron objects, Things positioned with clear intention, I don't remove them anymore. I photograph them, document them, but I leave them exactly where they are. Because some things are placed for protection. Some traditions exist for reasons that go deeper than superstition. Some nails aren't meant to be pulled. I carry iron nails in my work bag now, 4 of them, hand forged, wrapped in cloth. I've used them twice since the Hammond burial, both times at the Pitomeo. Request of families who knew what they were asking for, who understood the old ways, who believed the dead they were burying needed more than earth to keep them down. I don't ask questions. I don't judge. I just hammer the nails at the 4 corners after the ceremony ends, after the family leaves, after witnesses are gone. I hammer them deep, and I don't look back. Because I learned that my job isn't just about honoring the dead. Sometimes it's about making sure they stay dead, making sure whatever guilt, rage, or hunger they carried doesn't claw its way back to the surface looking for completion. The Hammond grave is quiet now. The nails hold, and I pray they continue to hold, because I've seen the scratches on that casket, and I know that what tried to get out wasn't Gerald Hammond anymore. It was something that wore his bones and wanted to finish what it started in 1967. The nails stay, and I'll make sure they're never removed again. I've managed cemetery grounds for most of my adult life, but I never expected to find myself buried in a jar before my time. My name is Tobias Flint, and I've served as cemetery manager at Hollow Creek Memorial Park in Asheville, North Carolina, for the past 21 years. I oversee 58 acres of burial grounds, coordinate with funeral directors, manage a maintenance staff, and ensure the property remains secure and respectful. The work is comprehensive, everything from burial logistics to landscape management to security protocols. I know every section, every fence line, every corner of this property. Or I thought I did, until we started repairs on the eastern perimeter and discovered what had been buried there for decades. The fence project began in mid-March. The eastern boundary, which runs along a wooded area bordering an old logging road, needed significant work. Posts were rotting, chain link sagging, several sections compromised by tree roots and ground erosion. I contracted a fencing company to replace the entire eastern perimeter, roughly 300 feet of barrier between the cemetery and the forest beyond. The crew started work on a Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, the foreman called me. "We've got something weird," he said. "You should come look." I drove to the eastern fence line. The crew had excavated post holes every 10 feet, digging down about 2 feet to set new supports. In the first 5 holes, they'd found glass jars, mason jars, the old kind with zinc lids, buried deliberately just inside the fence line. The foreman had lined them up on a tarp, 5 jars, various sizes, all sealed and filled with something dark. "We stopped digging when we realized there was a pattern," he said. "Didn't know if this was something historical, something you'd want to document." I picked up one of the jars. The glass was clouded with age and soil, but I could see the contents: dark earth, cemetery dirt, packed dense, and pressed against the glass, Visible through the grime was a photograph, a black and white image of a man, maybe 40 years old, wearing clothes that looked 1960s or 70s. I cleaned the jar carefully, examined it more closely. The photograph showed a man standing in front of a building I recognized, the old cemetery maintenance shed, torn down in the early 2000s. Behind him, headstones were visible, some that no longer existed. This photo was at least 40 years old. I opened the jar carefully, broke the seal that had held for decades. The smell was immediate, earth, rich and organic, but underneath it, something else. Something that made me want to breathe through my mouth. The dirt was mixed with small objects, roots, maybe, or seeds, plant matter long decayed, and the photograph, when I pulled it out, had writing on the back in faded ink, Thomas Redding, let him rest. I checked the other 4 jars. Each contained cemetery dirt and a photograph. 4 men, all photographed at Hollow Creek, all images at least 4 decades old. On the back of each photo, a name and the same phrase, let him rest. I researched the names. Thomas Redding worked as groundskeeper at Hollow Creek in the 1960s, died in 1973, buried in Section 4. The other 3 names, Harold Vance, Earl Pritchard, James Moon, all former employees of the cemetery, all deceased, all buried on the property. Someone had taken photographs of these men while they worked, placed the photos in jars with cemetery dirt, and buried them along the fence line. A memorial of some kind, or a ritual I didn't understand. Keep digging, I told the foreman, but carefully. Document where each jar is found. Over the next 3 days, they excavated the entire fence line, 23 jars total, buried at irregular intervals, all sealed, all containing dirt and photographs. Most showed former cemetery workers, groundskeepers, managers, grave diggers, people who'd spent their lives tending Hollow Creek. The most recent photo was from the late 1980s, showing a man I vaguely remembered from my early years working here. The oldest was from the 1940s, the photograph yellowed and cracked, but still legible. All but 1 jar contained photos of people who were dead. That last jar, number 23, found at the northern corner of the fence line, contained a photograph of me. I stood there holding it, feeling cold despite the warm afternoon. The photo was recent, maybe 5 years old, taken during a cemetery expansion ceremony. I was standing near the new section, smiling, surrounded by local officials and family members. It was a public event. Anyone could have taken this picture, but someone had printed it, placed it in a jar with cemetery dirt, and buried it along the fence line with all the others, following a pattern established decades ago, adding me to a collection of cemetery workers preserved in glass and earth. On the back, in the same style of faded ink, though obviously more recent, Tobias Flint, let him rest. I didn't tell my staff, didn't mention it to the fencing crew. I took all 23 jars to my office, lined them up on a shelf, and tried to understand what I was dealing with. The phrase, let him rest, suggested protection, a blessing, a wish for peace. But why bury photographs of living workers? Why include cemetery dirt? Why seal them in jars along the property boundary? I researched folk magic traditions, found references to jar spells, container magic, practices meant to bind, protect, or preserve. Some traditions buried photographs with earth to anchor spirits, to keep them close to meaningful places. Others used jars to protect the living, to create sympathetic bonds between person and place. The pattern suggested protection. Someone had been taking photographs of cemetery workers and burying them ritually along the fence line, possibly for decades. A tradition passed down, maintained by someone who cared enough to continue it long after the original practitioners were dead. But the jar containing my photograph disturbed me. I wasn't dead. I wasn't ready to rest. And the phrase felt less like blessing and more like prophecy. I made a decision. I would rebury the jars exactly where they would have been found, document their locations, and let the fence installation proceed around them. Whatever tradition this represented, it had been maintained for at least 70 years. I wasn't going to be the one to break it. I reburied them personally after the fencing crew left for the day, dug the holes, placed each jar carefully, covered them with earth, all 23, including mine. The fence posts were installed around them, careful not to disturb the burial locations. The new chain link went up, secure and proper, the eastern boundary restored. I woke up the next morning tasting soil, not the memory of taste, not imagination, actual earth, gritty and organic, coating my tongue and throat. I brushed my teeth 3 times. The taste remained, rinsed with mouthwash. It didn't fade. Drank coffee, ate breakfast. The taste of cemetery dirt persisted beneath everything, a constant reminder of what I'd reburied. The taste lasted for weeks. Every morning, I woke with earth in my mouth. Every night, I went to bed trying to wash it away. Doctors found nothing, no explanation, no diagnosis, no physical cause. Just the persistent taste of graveyard soil that I couldn't escape. I researched more desperately now, found references to sympathetic magic, to connections formed through burial of personal items. By reburying my photograph in cemetery dirt, I'd created a bond, a link between myself and the ground. I was tasting what the earth tasted, experiencing what the buried jar experienced. 6 weeks after I reburied the jars, the taste began to fade. Not completely, it never disappeared entirely, but it lessened to something I could ignore, something that only surfaced in quiet moments or early mornings. I checked the burial sites regularly. The earth remained undisturbed. The fence held strong, and I started looking for who might be maintaining the tradition, who might have taken my photograph and added me to the collection. I found her in late April, an elderly woman, maybe 80, walking the cemetery grounds slowly, carrying a camera. I approached carefully, introduced myself. Her name was Dorothy Sims, and her father had worked as a groundskeeper at Hollow Creek in the 1940s. He started the tradition, she said when I asked about the jars. Said cemetery workers give their lives to the dead, so someone should make sure they're remembered too. He'd take photographs of the men he worked with, bury them with cemetery dirt along the fence. Protection magic, he called it, keeping them connected to the place they served. Why bury them while they're still alive? I asked. She looked at me with patient eyes, because after they die, they're buried in the cemetery. The jars are for before that, making sure they're claimed by the ground they tended, ensuring their spirits know where they belong when the time comes. My father said it prevents wandering, gives them a place to return to. Your father's been dead for decades, I said. Who's been maintaining it? I have, since he passed in 1981. He taught me the ritual, made me promise to continue it. Every cemetery manager, every groundskeeper who serves more than 5 years, I photograph them, bury them along the eastern fence. It's protection, it's remembrance. You buried my photograph, I said. Last year, she confirmed. You'd been here 20 years. You qualified. I tasted dirt for 6 weeks. She nodded, unsurprised. That happens sometimes. Means you're connected now. Means the ground knows you. When you die, Tobias, you'll rest easy here. You'll be part of Hollow Creek forever. That's a blessing, not a curse. I wanted to argue, to tell her I hadn't consented, that she had no right to bind me to this place without permission. But looking at her aged face, her steady conviction, I understood. This was her father's legacy, her life's work. She'd buried 23 people in glass and dirt along the fence line, maintaining a tradition she believed protected souls and honored service. And maybe it did. 22 of the people in those jars were buried at Hollow Creek. They'd worked here, died here, rested here. Only I remained living, connected to the ground through dirt and photograph, tasting earth every morning as a reminder of where I'd eventually rest. The taste has faded to almost nothing now. I barely notice it anymore, except on quiet mornings when the cemetery is empty and the ground feels more present than usual. Then I taste it again, rich earth, organic and deep, the soil I've walked on for 21 years. I don't remove my jar. Don't ask Dorothy to dig it up, because she's right, in a way I didn't want to accept. I've given most of my life to Hollow Creek. I've buried thousands of people here, tended their graves, maintained their memory. Maybe it's appropriate that I'm already buried here too, preserved in glass and dirt along the eastern fence, waiting for the day when my body joins the photograph. Dorothy still visits, still carries her camera. I've seen her photographing my newer staff members, the ones who've been here long enough to matter, and I don't stop her, because maybe the tradition has value. Maybe being claimed by the ground you serve is a kind of peace. I taste earth every morning, and I've learned to accept it, the flavor of where I'll rest, the promise that when I die, I won't wander. I'll return to Hollow Creek, join the 22 others buried in the fence line, and rest in the ground I've tended all these years. The jars remain buried, the tradition continues, and somewhere along the eastern fence, my photograph waits in darkness, preserved in cemetery dirt, letting me rest even before I'm ready to lie down. I've placed hundreds of headstones in my career, but I only witnessed one replace itself with a message that traveled across 4 centuries to deliver a warning. My name is Anya Volkov, and I've worked as a mortician and memorial coordinator at Eastridge Cemetery in Salem, Massachusetts for the past 14 years. I handle everything from embalming, and funeral coordination to headstone ordering and installation verification. My job requires precision, documentation, and respect for families' wishes regarding how their loved ones are memorialized. I verify every detail, names, dates, epitaphs, ensuring each stone matches the approved order exactly. That attention to detail is what made me notice when a headstone I'd installed personally was replaced overnight with one bearing words I'd never approved, words that shouldn't exist in any modern order. The Whitmore stone was installed on a Thursday in late September. Jonathan Whitmore, 67, died after a long battle with cancer. His family chose a traditional gray granite marker, simple and dignified, with his name, dates, and an epitaph his wife selected: beloved husband and father, forever in our hearts. Standard wording, professionally engraved, properly installed by our contracted monument company. I supervised the placement personally, verified the inscription matched the order form, took photographs for our records. Everything was correct, documented, complete. Friday morning, I received a call from the cemetery groundskeeper. Something's wrong with the Whitmore stone, he said. You should come look. I drove out immediately. The stone was still there, same location, same gray granite, same size and shape. But the inscription had changed. Jonathan's name and dates remained identical. The epitaph had been replaced with text that I didn't recognize. Hic manet vinctus qui non coescere potest. I stood there, reading and rereading the words, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't the epitaph we'd ordered. This wasn't English, Latin, maybe, but I wasn't certain. And more impossibly, this text was professionally engraved, the letters cut deep into granite with the same precision as the original, the same font style, the same weathering patterns that suggested the stone had been carved weeks ago, not overnight. I checked my photographs from the installation. The original epitaph was clearly visible: beloved husband and father, forever in our hearts. I looked back at the stone in front of me. Hic manet vinctus qui non quiescere potest. I called the monument company. Did you replace the Whitmore stone? I asked, though I knew the question was absurd. The owner was confused. Replace it? We installed it yesterday. Why would we replace it? The epitaph is different. It's in another language. Silence. Then, that's impossible. We don't replace stones overnight, and we don't engrave text that's not on the order form. Someone's playing a trick on you. But who and how? Replacing a granite headstone requires equipment, expertise, and time. You can't simply swap stones like changing a sign. The weight alone, several hundred pounds, demands machinery, and the engraving quality was perfect, professional, identical to the original work. I checked our security footage. The cemetery had cameras at the main gate and office, but not at individual plot coverage. The footage showed no vehicles entering after closing, no equipment, no workers. Just empty darkness from 7 in the evening until I arrived at 8 the next morning. I took detailed photographs of the new inscription, measured the stone, verified its position. Everything matched the original installation except the epitaph. Even the base was undisturbed, set in the same concrete foundation we'd poured during installation. I called Jonathan's widow, Mrs. Whitmore, kept my voice calm and professional. I need to verify something about the epitaph on your husband's stone, I said. Did you or your family request any changes after installation? Changes? She sounded alarmed. No. Is something wrong? I didn't want to explain over the phone. May I visit you this afternoon? I'd like to discuss the inscription. She agreed. I showed her the photographs, both the original and the changed version. She stared at the Latin text, her face pale. I don't understand. What does it say? I'm not sure yet. I'll need to have it translated. But you didn't authorize this? No. We approved the original, beloved husband and father. That's what we wanted. What is this? I promised to investigate, assured her we'd correct the error at no cost to the family, but I didn't tell her what I suspected, that this wasn't an error. This was something deliberate, something impossible, something that required an understanding beyond my expertise. I contacted a linguistics professor at Boston University, someone I'd worked with on historical cemetery projects. I sent her the photographs and the text. She called me back within an hour. This is medieval Latin, she said, 16th century, based on the grammatical structure and word choice. It translates roughly to, "Here remains bound one who cannot rest." I felt cold. Bound? It's curse language, or binding language, more specifically, the kind of inscription used in 16th century Europe to trap spirits, to prevent the dead from rising or wandering. It's not a memorial, it's a restraint. Why would someone carve that on a grave? She paused. Usually, because they believed the deceased was dangerous. Witch trials, suspected vampirism, deaths surrounded by suspicious circumstances. The binding curse was carved into the stone to keep the soul trapped in the grave. It's rare, but documented. This is a modern grave, I said. The man died last week. This doesn't make sense. Then someone believes Jonathan Whitmore needs to be bound, she said carefully, or something that shares his grave does. I researched Jonathan's history. That evening, standard biographical information at first. 67 years old, retired accountant, survived by wife and 2 adult children. But deeper searches revealed more. Jonathan's original name was Jonah Wilder. He'd changed it legally in 1982, the same year he left his hometown of Salem, New Hampshire, and moved to Massachusetts. I found archived newspaper articles from 1981, 3 deaths in Salem, New Hampshire, 3 young women, all found in the woods, all victims of what authorities called ritualistic killings. Jonah Wilder had been questioned, no charges filed, insufficient evidence, but the suspicion destroyed his life. He left town, changed his name, started over as Jonathan Whitmore. The cases were never solved. The 3 women remained buried in Salem, New Hampshire. Their families remained convinced Jonah Wilder was responsible, that he'd escaped justice through legal technicalities and clever lawyers. I don't know who replaced the headstone. I don't know how they accomplished it physically, or how they knew Jonathan Whitmore had been Jonah Wilder, or why they chose a 16th century binding curse to mark his grave. But someone did, someone who believed strongly enough to undertake something impossible, to replace several hundred pounds of engraved granite with a stone bearing words meant to trap his soul. I called the monument company again, ordered a replacement with the original approved epitaph. The new stone was installed within a week. Mrs. Whitmore attended the installation, verified the inscription was correct. I documented everything, photographed the new stone from multiple angles, assured her it wouldn't happen again. The next morning, the binding curse was back. Same Latin text, same professional engraving. The replacement stone with beloved husband and father was gone, vanished completely, as if it had never existed. I stopped trying to change it, told Mrs. Whitmore that stone damage from ground settling had required a repair, that the inscription was now permanent and protected. She accepted the explanation, trusted that her husband's memorial was properly honored. Well, I don't think she ever visited the grave again. She moved to Florida 6 months later, sold the house, left Salem entirely. The stone remains. Hic manet vinctus qui non quiescere potest. Here remains bound one who cannot rest. I check it every few months, make sure the inscription hasn't changed, make sure the ground hasn't been disturbed, the grass grows normally, the stone stands straight, everything appears peaceful, but I've noticed something. Other graves near Jonathan's, plots within maybe 20 feet, have experienced unusual settling. The ground sinks irregularly, creating depressions that don't match normal decomposition patterns. Flowers wilted faster there. Trees nearby show stress, branches dying on the sides facing his plot. And twice, late in the evening, during winter, when the cemetery's empty, I've seen frost patterns on Jonathan's stone, not random crystallization, deliberate patterns, geometric shapes that form around the Latin words like emphasis, like the temperature itself is responding to the binding curse, reinforcing it. I researched binding magic more thoroughly, found that some traditions believe the bindings must be renewed, reinforced, maintained, that the stone itself becomes a vessel for the curse, holding the spirit in place through words carved deep enough to reach beyond the physical world into wherever souls wait. I don't know if Jonathan Whitmore was guilty. I'll never know if Jonah Wilder killed those 3 women in 1981. But someone believes strongly enough to impose a binding that transcends normal reality, that replaces stone with stone, that enforces a curse across centuries and continues to hold. I maintain the grave professionally, keep the grass trimmed, the area clean, but I don't try to change the stone anymore. The Latin remains, the binding remains, and Jonathan Whitmore rests under words that promise he cannot rise, cannot wander, cannot escape whatever judgment waits beyond the granite that bears his name. The Whitmore family never learned the truth, and I'll never tell them. Some knowledge is too heavy to carry, some mysteries too dark to explain. Better they believe their husband and father rests peacefully, his grave properly honored, his memory preserved. I know differently. I know that under the professional landscaping and respectful maintenance, under the gray granite engraved with ancient Latin, something is bound in place, held by words carved by hands I never saw, following justice I can't verify, enforcing consequences that reach beyond death into whatever comes after. The stone stands, the curse holds, and I've learned that some graves aren't marked for the living to remember. They're marked for the dead to understand that they're not free to leave. Hic manet vinctus qui non quiescere potest. Here remains bound one who cannot rest, and I make sure he never does. I've welcomed thousands of mourners into viewing rooms over the years, but only one left marks on every casket she touched, and only one claimed the dead had invited her. My name is Garrett Sullivan, and I've worked as a funeral director and embalmer at Riverside Funeral Home in Portland, Maine for the past 18 years. I coordinate services, prepare bodies, and manage viewing room logistics with careful attention to detail and respect. The work requires understanding grief in its many forms, accommodating different mourning traditions, and ensuring every service proceeds with dignity. I've seen countless variations of how people say goodbye. I thought I'd witnessed every ritual, every gesture of farewell. Then an elderly woman started appearing at our funerals, marking caskets with ash and claiming the deceased had summoned her personally. I first noticed her at the Morrison service in late January. Eleanor Morrison, 74, longtime Portland resident, well attended viewing with maybe 40 people. I stood at the back of the room as I always do, available if families need assistance, but maintaining respectful distance. An elderly woman, maybe 80, dressed in a long black coat, moved slowly past the casket. As she passed, she pressed her thumb briefly to the side of the casket, just a gentle touch, barely noticeable. I thought nothing of it. People touch caskets. It's a final gesture, a way to feel closer to the deceased. But after she left, and I was resetting the room, I noticed a mark on the casket side. A faint gray smudge, thumb-sized, like ash residue or fine powder. I wiped it away with a cloth and forgot about it. She appeared again 3 days later at the Chen service. Different family, different deceased, no obvious connection to the Morrison funeral. But there she was, same black coat, same slow movement past the casket, same gentle press of her thumb to the wood. This time, I watched more carefully. She approached, stood before the casket for perhaps 30 seconds, then as she turned to leave, she placed her thumb against the casket side. The gesture was deliberate but subtle, something only someone specifically watching would notice. After the viewing ended, I checked the casket. Same gray mark, same ash-like residue in the shape of a thumbprint. The third time was the Patterson funeral, viewing on a Tuesday afternoon for a man who died in a car accident. Tragic and unexpected, the elderly woman arrived alone, signed the guest book with a name I couldn't quite read, spent 5 minutes at the casket, and left her mark as she departed. I caught her in the parking lot, approached gently, introduced myself as funeral director. "Excuse me, ma'am. I've noticed you've attended several services here recently." She looked at me with pale blue eyes, calm and direct. "Yes." "Did you know the deceased? The Patterson family?" "No," she said simply, "but you attended the viewing." "They asked me to." I paused, trying to understand. "The family asked you?" "No." She smiled slightly. "They did. The ones who passed. They asked me to come." I felt uncomfortable, but maintained my professional composure. "I see. And the mark you leave on the caskets, may I ask what that's about? It lets them know I was here, that I heard them, that someone bore witness. She walked to a very old sedan and drove away before I could ask more questions. I returned to my office and checked our guest books from the past month. Her signature appeared in 7 services, 7 different families, 7 different deceased, no obvious connections. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. Miriam Frost. I researched her, found a phone number and address in a modest neighborhood in South Portland. No criminal record, no concerning background. Just an elderly woman, 82 according to public records, widowed, no children, living alone on a fixed income. I called her. Miss Frost, this is Garrett Sullivan from Riverside Funeral Home. I was hoping I could speak with you about the services you've been attending. Of course, she said pleasantly. Would you like to visit? I met her at her home the following afternoon. A small house, neat and clean, filled with old furniture and the kind of accumulated objects that mark a long life. She made tea, served it in delicate china cups, and sat across from me in her living room with the patient attention of someone who had all the time in the world. How do they ask you? I started directly, uncertain how else to approach it. They whisper, she said, usually at night. I hear their names, their locations, when the services will be held. It started about 6 months ago, after my husband died. And you attend these funerals for people you don't know? Yes, someone should witness. Someone should acknowledge their passing. They reach out to me because they know I'll come. They know I'll mark their caskets, leave proof that they were heard. The ash marks, what are those? She set down her teacup carefully. My husband's ashes. I carry a small amount with me always. When I mark the caskets, I'm connecting them, one death acknowledging another. It comforts them, I think, knowing they're not alone, knowing someone who understands death came to bear witness. I sat quietly, trying to process what she was telling me. Miss Frost, I need to ask you not to mark the caskets anymore. The families find it distressing when we discover unexplained marks on their loved ones' caskets. She looked at me with those calm blue eyes. The families don't notice, only you do, and I can't stop. They ask me to come. It would be cruel to ignore them. Over the following months, Miriam Frost attended every service at Riverside Funeral Home. Not every funeral, only specific ones. I tracked them, tried to find patterns. Young deaths, old deaths, accidents, illnesses, all demographics, all backgrounds, no predictable pattern except this. Miriam attended, and Miriam left her mark. I started, checking the caskets immediately after viewings. The ash thumbprints were always there, always on the side of the casket near the head, always the same size and position. I began wiping them away immediately, before families could see, before anyone else noticed. But then I started having dreams. The deceased from services Miriam attended appeared to me at night, standing at the foot of my bed, looking at me with patient expectation. They didn't speak, they didn't threaten, they just stood there, waiting, until I acknowledged them. When I spoke their names aloud, they faded. I called Miriam again. They're appearing to me now, I said. The people whose funerals you attend, I see them in my dreams. Because you're erasing the marks, she said gently. You're removing proof of witness. They need that acknowledgement to rest. When you wipe away the ash, you're telling them they weren't worth acknowledging. I'm protecting the families from distress. You're protecting yourself from discomfort, she corrected. The families never see the marks, only you do, and the marks aren't for the families, they're for the dead. I stopped wiping away the thumbprints, left them on the caskets, let them remain through the viewings and services. No family ever mentioned them. No one ever noticed except me. And the dreams stopped. The deceased stopped appearing at night, stopped waiting for acknowledgement I'd been refusing to give. I've tracked Miriam's attendance now for 6 months. 30 funerals, 30 strangers she claims called to her in whispers, 30 caskets marked with ash from her husband's cremated remains. And I've verified something that makes me deeply uncomfortable. Every person whose funeral Miriam attends died alone. Not physically alone necessarily, but emotionally isolated, no close family, few friends, minimal mourners at their services. People who passed with little witness, little acknowledgement that they'd lived. Miriam serves as witness for the unwanted, the forgotten, the ones who die without enough people caring to properly mourn them. She comes because they ask her to. She marks their caskets because someone needs to acknowledge their passing, and she carries her husband's ashes because death. Recognizing death is the most honest witness available. I don't try to stop her anymore. I recognize her car in the parking lot, see her entering the funeral home in her black coat, watch her move slowly past caskets, and leave her marks. I check the sign-in books and note which services she attends, and I ensure her marks remain undisturbed, visible to me if no one else, proof that someone came, someone witnessed, someone cared enough to acknowledge a death that might otherwise pass unnoticed. Yesterday, she attended a service for a homeless man who died of exposure. 7 people attended, 3 shelter workers, 2 volunteers from a local church, and Miriam Frost. She stood at the casket longer than usual, pressed her thumb to the wood with deliberate care, and left a mark darker than the others, as if she'd used more ash, given more witness to someone who needed it most. I didn't wipe it away. I photographed it for my records, documented it as I now document all of Miriam's marks. Because I've learned that some gestures matter more than protocol, some witnesses serve purposes beyond conventional mourning, and some marks left on caskets aren't vandalism or confusion, they're proof. Proof that someone came, proof that death was acknowledged, proof that even in dying alone, you weren't entirely alone. Someone heard you whisper, someone answered your call, someone pressed ash from another death against your casket and said, I witness your passing, I mark your departure, you were here and you mattered. Miriam Frost is 82 years old. She attends funerals for strangers. She marks their caskets with ash from her husband's cremated remains. And she does this because the dead ask her to, because someone needs to bear witness, because dying without acknowledgement is the loneliest thing possible. I understand now. I protect her marks. I honor her presence at our services, and when she eventually passes, when Miriam Frost becomes the deceased in one of our viewing rooms, I'll make sure someone bears witness. I'll make sure someone marks her casket, acknowledges her passing, proves that she wasn't alone, because that's what she's been doing for 30 strangers over 6 months. And someone needs to promise they'll do the same for her. The marks remain. The witness continues. And I've learned that my job isn't just preparing bodies and coordinating services. Sometimes it's protecting the small rituals that matter most, the ones that acknowledge death, honor passing, and ensure that even in dying, no one is truly forgotten. Miriam Frost will attend another funeral tomorrow. I've seen her name in the guest book already, signed in advance, and I'll watch for her mark, document it, preserve it, and understand that some things matter more than clean caskets and conventional protocol. Sometimes what matters is ash pressed against wood by an elderly woman who listens when the dead whisper and answers when they call.